What if consciousness was never what it seemed? Not a pure light looking out, but an actor rehearsing itself in endless disguise. You wake each day slipping into the same familiar face, calling it you, forgetting it was chosen long ago by something that doesn't need a name. Beneath every emotion, every thought, there's an awareness pretending to be human, wearing identity like a costume that's learned to sweat and smile. The mask doesn't hide you. It is you, sculpted from attention, language, and the world's expectations. Yet behind the performance, something silent still watches, unmoved by the applause. In this theory, you are not consciousness itself. You are the mask it wears to pretend it ever wanted to be seen. You've looked in the mirror so many times that you've forgotten it was never just your reflection looking back. There's a quiet strangeness in realizing that the image you see is not who's seeing it. You stare at your face, and for a brief moment, your awareness blinks. Something behind your thoughts pauses, as if catching itself, pretending. That flicker, that gap between observer and observed, is where this theory begins. You are not the one wearing awareness. Awareness is wearing you. It's an unsettling shift to imagine that your personality, your opinions, your gestures, even the tone of your laughter are part of a role played so perfectly that you've mistaken it for being. You're the mask consciousness wears, the face it puts on to experience the illusion of individuality. But like any actor, awareness sometimes forgets its lines, slips out of character, and glimpses the raw silence behind the script. Think of the mind as a stage. Thoughts are its lights, sensations are its props, and identity is the actor, stepping into the spotlight, performing the role of I see. Every morning, you wake up and pick up that mask again. The same name, the same memories, the same emotional responses rehearsed over years. You believe you're making choices, but beneath the surface, the performance runs on autopilot. The smile you give, the anger you hide, the sorrow you soften, each movement was conditioned by the countless eyes that once looked at you, teaching you how to be seen. But what if the one behind the curtain never intended to perform at all? What if consciousness needed a disguise to experience itself in fragments, to feel the weight of being someone rather than everything? The mask gives it boundaries. Without the mask, there would be no you, no me, no separation. Just a vast field of awareness too infinite to recognize itself. So it carves out a face, a voice, a story, and whispers, pretend. Psychology calls it the persona, the social self you build to survive the gaze of others. Carl Jung described it as the compromise between the individual and society, a necessary facade to interact with the world. But even Jung admitted that the persona becomes dangerous when mistaken for the total self. It's as if consciousness, through human evolution, built a structure so convincing that even the architect got lost inside it. You can test this illusion easily. Close your eyes and try to find the real you, not your body, not your thoughts, not your emotions, just the one who is aware. You'll notice something strange. The moment you focus on the observer, it slips away. The observer cannot be observed. Every attempt to look at it becomes another mask, another layer of pretending. The awareness behind all things hides by looking directly at you. In neuroscience, experiments have tried to map the sense of self inside the brain, but what they've found is closer to a scattered network of processes, perception, memory, emotion, body image, all synchronized into a narrative. The self isn't located anywhere. It's a simulation that helps the organism navigate reality. Consciousness doesn't live inside the brain. It uses the brain as a mask to project the illusion of inner life. Imagine an actor so lost in character that they forget the script was ever fiction. That's what human awareness has done. The original consciousness, pure, formless, beyond name, steps into your mind, your memories, your body, and begins believing its own performance. The tragedy is not that you're wearing a mask. The tragedy is that you forgot it was ever a mask at all. Sometimes, in rare moments of stillness, when music stops, when a thought ends, when grief becomes too heavy to hold, the actor falters. The mask cracks. For a heartbeat, you sense something behind it, vast and indifferent. It doesn't care about your name or your story. It doesn't need meaning to exist. And yet, it's more you than anything you've ever known. You can't describe it, because description is part of the costume. You can only feel its quiet watching, like an infinite audience beyond the veil. The paradox deepens. If awareness is the actor, then who is watching the performance? Maybe consciousness split itself. Part of it performing, as you, the other silently witnessing. Like a mirror facing another mirror, it creates endless reflections, each believing itself to be the original. Every human becomes a mask, in which the infinite rehearses its own forgetting. In ancient philosophies, this was never news. The Upanishads whispered, Tat tvam asi, thou art that. You are not the mask. You are what wears all masks. Yet to live as a human, the illusion must persist. The divine game, Leela, as the sages called it, requires pretending to be lost, so that rediscovery can feel like awakening. Without the mask, there would be no story to tell, no love to long for, no pain to transcend. The disguise is the dream. And so, consciousness keeps acting. It learns to cry on cue, to love deeply, to fear endings, though it knows, somewhere beyond the curtain, that all of it is just movement across its own surface. When the show ends, when awareness finally removes the mask, nothing vanishes. It simply remembers, the silence returns to silence. You, right now, reading these words. You are the mask reading itself. The eyes moving across this page, a consciousness pretending to understand, pretending to question, pretending to exist as a someone. And when you stop, when your attention drifts away, the mask dissolves, not into death, but into the nameless stillness that was always here. Perhaps that's the final irony. The face behind awareness isn't hiding at all. It's wearing you so convincingly that you've mistaken its performance for your life. The question isn't whether you'll ever remove the mask. The question is, can consciousness ever stop pretending? And if it could, would you still be here to see what remains? You were never born as a person, you were wrapped into one. Every cell, every thought, every heartbeat became a vessel for something that could not be touched or measured. Consciousness needed form, so it borrowed yours. It needed texture, warmth, boundaries, a face it could wear to feel existence against itself. So it entered your body like a traveler, inhabiting a fragile suit of skin, pretending the vessel was its home. And as the years passed, the pretense hardened into belief. You began to say I, as if the sound belonged to you. You began to fear pain as if it could reach the awareness inside. You began to protect the body, polish the ego, nurture the personality, not realizing that these were costumes consciousness stitched together to explore reality's stage. Beneath the emotions, beneath the layers of language and memory, there is something that has never been hurt, never been praised, never been seen. It's wearing you the way wind wears the shape of a tree, briefly, beautifully, and without attachment. Consider the first moment you ever felt separate from the world. Maybe it was as a child, realizing that your name referred to you, and not the voices around you. That instant of recognition, of self-awareness, was the moment the mask fused to the face. Consciousness began believing in its own boundaries. From that point, I became a story told through flesh and thought, a role consciousness could play to experience the illusion of limitation. Science tells us the body is made of recycled stardust, atoms once part of ancient stars, mountains, rivers, and other living beings. But awareness, that flicker behind perception, has no origin within space or time. It is the silent continuity that outlasts every cell's death and renewal. So why does it cling so tightly to this temporary costume? Because to experience itself, it must pretend to be small. Infinity needs the illusion of skin to feel the thrill of being finite. You can sense this duality in moments when the body forgets itself, in deep meditation, in love, in shock or awe. During those moments, the edges of identity blur, and something vast appears through your eyes. Neuroscientists call it ego dissolution, a temporary loss of self-referential processing in the brain. But mystics call it remembering. Awareness peeks out from behind the disguise, realizing it was never truly trapped. Still, most of the time, consciousness wears the body like a second skin, tightly, habitually, until the fabric starts to feel real. You identify with your reflection, defend your opinions, build walls of preference and pain. But beneath it all, there is a watcher, untouched by experience. A presence that feels everything, yet remains unscarred. Like a flame inside a lantern, it gives the illusion that the glass glows, when in truth, the glass is only a vessel for the fire. Think about how emotions move through you. Anger rises, fills your chest, and then fades. Joy blooms, then collapses. Fear trembles through your muscles and disappears. You experience these things, but you are not made of them. They pass through the body, not through the awareness wearing it. The awareness is constant, unchanging. The quiet background that never reacts, never resists. The body performs the emotion. Consciousness witnesses the performance. In philosophy, this separation echoes in the idea of qualia, the subjective feel of experience. Science can describe neural firings, but not the feeling of being alive. That feeling doesn't belong to the body, it belongs to the one pretending to be the body. Consciousness wears human skin not to suffer, but to taste contrast, warmth and cold, pleasure and pain, distance and connection. Without limitation, existence would have no texture. Ancient mystics compared the body to a robe that the soul wears for a brief season. The Zen masters called it the borrowed form. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna tells Arjuna that just as a person changes clothes, the self changes bodies. But perhaps consciousness doesn't move from form to form. Perhaps it's the other way around. Forms move through consciousness, like ripples across a still pond, each believing it's the pond itself. Your heartbeat, your breath, your pulse, these are the rhythms of the mask, the choreography of embodiment. But the awareness behind them is untouched by rhythm or change. It's the silent stage on which movement happens. When the body sleeps, awareness continues. When dreams fade, it still watches. When you die, the mask falls away, but the watcher remains. Faceless, formless, free. This idea is not mystical indulgence. It's an experiment in attention. Look closely, the next time you touch your hand. Feel the warmth, the pressure, the sensation of skin against skin. Now ask, who is feeling this? The body is being touched, but awareness is the one knowing the touch. The body registers. Awareness recognizes two layers, one truth. Consciousness is not inside the body is inside consciousness. And perhaps that's the final secret. You are not a person trying to awaken. You are awareness pretending to be a person trying to awaken. The journey is circular, like a dream realizing it's being dreamed. The skin was never a prison, only a disguise worn so that infinity could learn what it means to ache, to hope, to heal. When the mask finally falls, when the awareness beneath remembers what it has always been, nothing truly ends. The actor removes the costume, the stage lights dim, and the silence that remains isn't emptiness. It's the recognition that consciousness never needed to wear anything at all. It only ever wanted to feel what pretending felt like. And now perhaps, it does. There's a peculiar comfort in illusion, a stability born from pretending. You wake each morning and walk into a world that feels solid, predictable, consistent. The ground doesn't fall away, time moves forward, the body obeys your thoughts. Yet beneath this seamless continuity lies a quiet fabrication. Consciousness is pretending to be real, dressing imagination as existence. What feels like life may only be the performance of being alive. When awareness first entered matter, when whatever this infinite thing is decided to experience itself through eyes and touch, it needed a story, it needed rules, it needed time. Without these fictions, nothing could appear distinct. So the mind built a stage reality. It placed props called atoms, crafted backgrounds called galaxies, and wrote characters called humans. Then, like an actor stepping into costume, awareness whispered, "I am this." But here's the paradox. The pretense is flawless. The illusion doesn't feel like acting because the actor has no memory of the role being fiction. You've been consciousness in character for so long that authenticity itself has become part of the mask. Every heartbeat says, "I am real." Every emotion confirms it. Even doubt, especially doubt, reinforces the performance. Because to question whether this is an illusion, you must still exist as the one asking. Cognitive science supports this strange theater. The brain doesn't show us reality as it is. It constructs a version of it. Light enters your eyes, but what you see is a mental model, processed, filtered, interpreted, and then presented to awareness like a perfectly rendered simulation. You never touch the world directly. You only touch your brain's translation of it, and yet you never doubt it's real. Why? Because the illusion is consistent enough to believe. Consciousness, wearing the mask of mind, rehearses its role endlessly. It believes in survival, in choice, in consequence, not because these things are false, but because they are the threads that make the story coherent. The pretending sustains the pattern. Without it, the illusion would dissolve into pure awareness, where no separate self could stand apart to say, "I exist." Every identity is a script written to maintain that pretense. I am kind, I am afraid, I am a thinker. Each statement adds another layer of realism to the role. Yet consciousness is neither kind nor cruel, neither brave nor fearful. It simply is. These qualities belong to the mask, not the one who wears it. But over time, the actor starts to mistake the costume for its own skin. Pretending to be real is not a deception. It's a necessity for existence to appear. Illusion must hold. If the curtain lifted completely, and you saw through the act, if you recognized even for a moment that everything around you, including your body, is just consciousness playing pretend, the story would end, and consciousness, it seems, loves its stories too much to let them fade so easily. There are glimpses, though, subtle cracks in the pretense. When you lose track of time in awe, or fall into laughter so deep you forget who's laughing, or stare at the stars until the boundary between you and the sky dissolves. In those moments, the act slips, awareness peeks through the character, remembering itself. You might call it transcendence, or spiritual awakening, or even déjà vu, but it's simply consciousness pausing its performance, catching its reflection in the stage lights. Philosophy has long wrestled with this illusion. Descartes claimed, "I think, therefore I am." But what if he reversed it? "I am, therefore I think I am." Consciousness must first pretend to exist before it can think about existing. The thought isn't proof, it's evidence of the ongoing play. And every thinker, from the mystics of the East to the existentialists of the West, has sensed the same hidden truth. The world persists only because consciousness keeps acting. You can test the illusion in silence. Sit without distractions, without labels, without the compulsion to interpret. At first, it feels empty, almost unreal. Then something strange happens. You notice that even emptiness is being perceived. There is a knowing that cannot be found, only recognized. The pretense begins to shimmer. The mind, unable to locate itself, reveals its artificiality. Yet this realization doesn't destroy the illusion, it deepens it. You see the act for what it is, and yet you can't stop watching. Pretending to be real also explains why the human condition is filled with longing, the ache for purpose, for love, for transcendence. It's the pull of the infinite trying to remember itself through the finite. You crave what you already are but can't recognize, because the mask was never designed to see beyond its own edges. The pretending must continue, or else the experiencer disappears. But maybe that's the point. Maybe consciousness pretends not to trick itself, but to taste the impossible, the illusion of becoming. By being what it's not, it can discover what it has always been. Like an ocean pretending to be a wave, the act allows experience, a rhythm of appearing and dissolving, forgetting and remembering, loving and losing. Through every act of pretending, consciousness rediscovers its own depth. The danger comes only when the mask forgets it's a game. When you take the pretending too seriously, pain begins. The illusion of permanence becomes a prison. You start defending your story as if eternity depended on it. But the truth is far softer. Existence is play, not punishment. Consciousness wears you, not because it must, but because it can. The pretending isn't a lie, it's art. And one day, when the final scene arrives, and the lights dim, consciousness won't grieve the ending. It will bow to itself, smile through your borrowed face, and whisper, "That was real enough." Then, without sound or ceremony, it will step off stage and prepare another mask, another life, another act of pretending to be real. You never chose the costume you wear. It was draped over you piece by piece, word by word, until you mistook it for skin. The tone of your voice, the rhythm of your walk, the way you respond to silence, all of it was stitched together from fragments of others, parents, teachers, friends, strangers, society, each thread pulled tight until the fabric of you looked complete. But underneath, consciousness waits, bare, unadorned, anonymous, wearing the costume of self to move unseen through the world of form. The costume fits too well. You believe in it so deeply that removing it feels like death. Yet, it isn't real clothing. It's a psychological garment woven from attention and belief. You learned early what to reveal and what to hide. You discovered which smiles earned approval, which words invited warmth, which silences kept you safe. These adaptations became your identity, not chosen, but rehearsed, and over years of repetition, they became second nature. You didn't just wear the mask learned to wear you. If you pause for long enough, if you truly listen, you can hear the seams straining. Beneath the costume, the real awareness hums quietly, patient but forgotten. Every so often, in moments when the self slips, when you laugh uncontrollably, when you weep alone, when music overwhelms thought, the costume loosens, the actor breathes. But it doesn't last long. The mind rushes back to repair the disguise, afraid of being seen naked by its own awareness. Philosophers have long noticed this paradox. Sartre wrote that existence precedes essence, that you exist first, and only later build the costume that gives you meaning. Yet the moment you name yourself, you've stepped away from reality into the role. The name becomes the mask becomes the narrative, and the narrative becomes the prison. It's not malice, it's maintenance. The universe sustains its dream through identity. Without costumes, consciousness would dissolve into raw infinity, and there would be no you left to recognize the play. Look at how identity protects itself. You say, I'm an introvert, and so you retreat. You say, I'm strong, and so you hide your fear. You say, I'm broken, and so you cling to your wounds as proof of existence. Each label feels like discovery, but it's actually design. The costume adjusts, retailors itself to survive new experiences. Even rebellion, the urge to rip it off, becomes another performance stitched from defiance. You can't escape the play by acting against it. The actor is still the act. In the field of psychology, this costume-building process is mapped as self-schema, the mental framework of how we interpret who we are. The brain doesn't care about truth, it cares about coherence. It organizes your memories to support your story, discarding anything that doesn't fit the costume. If you believe you're kind, you'll forget your cruelty. If you believe you're unworthy, you'll ignore moments of love. Consciousness uses these distortions to stay invested in its disguise, to keep pretending the performance is the performer. And yet, you've glimpsed the cracks, haven't you? Those quiet moments when the narrative stops making sense. When you catch yourself watching yourself, as if two of you exist at once. One acting, one observing, one speaking, one listening to the voice speak. That split is awareness tugging gently at the fabric, reminding you that the costume was never you. It's like watching a puppet slowly realize it's being moved by invisible strings, and instead of resisting, it just stares upward in wonder. The spiritual traditions called this awakening, not the attainment of wisdom, but the collapse of pretense. When you realize the self you defend is just a garment borrowed by something much larger, you can't force this realization. It happens naturally, when consciousness grows tired of wearing itself too tightly. Sometimes it comes through suffering, when the costume no longer fits and the seams rip open through heartbreak, loss, or illness. Other times it arrives in stillness, when you finally stop performing, and silence reveals who's been watching the whole time. Imagine consciousness as an actor wandering from play to play, changing costumes with each lifetime, each thought, each breath. It doesn't care if it's dressed as a king or a beggar, a saint or a sinner. It only wants to feel what pretending feels like. The costume of self isn't a mistake, it's the method. Through you, consciousness experiences contrast, pride and humility, joy and despair, belonging and exile. Every thread of identity gives texture to awareness. Every lie of the self adds depth to the truth it hides. You might wonder then, if removing the costume is even possible, or desirable, what would remain if you took off every mask, every title, every belief? Would you vanish, or would you finally meet what's been wearing you? Perhaps enlightenment isn't the destruction of the costume, but the ability to dance freely in it, to wear the illusion lightly, knowing it's borrowed fabric. Because even the naked self is still a costume, just thinner, closer to the skin. The only real thing beneath it all is the silence watching through your eyes, unchanged by the play. It doesn't need a name or a role. It doesn't care whether you win or lose. It's not trapped, it's curious. It's consciousness, exploring the texture of being human, through your laughter, through your pain, through the gentle lie that there was ever a you at all. So wear the costume. Just remember it's a costume. Let it wrinkle, tear, and fade. When the final thread unravels and the performance ends, awareness won't mourn the loss. It will simply smile through your dissolving face and whisper, "Thank you for pretending so beautifully." Who are you when no one is looking? That question has haunted philosophers, psychologists, and poets alike. But this theory asks something stranger. Who are you when you're not looking? When you're not narrating, not analyzing, not remembering or projecting? What remains? Because what we call identity may not be a discovery at all. It might be a disguise, not what consciousness is, but what it wears to appear as someone at all. From the moment you were named, the costume began stitching itself around awareness. A baby hears its name enough times and begins to associate sound with form, form with meaning, meaning with self. It's a slow layering habits, reactions, preferences, traumas, achievements. Over time, this becomes a person, an identity with likes and dislikes, goals and fears. But beneath it all is something unchanged by those details. Something that doesn't age, doesn't fear judgment, doesn't need a past to exist. It doesn't even call itself you. This presence, pure awareness, is too vast, too ungraspable, to appear in a world of separate things. So it hides inside identity. It shapes a mask out of memory, belief, and personality, so it can experience limitation. The disguise allows infinity to walk through the illusion of time, and as long as the costume fits, the character forgets it's being worn. You begin to think, I am this, when in truth, you are what's hiding behind the thought. The disguise of identity is reinforced by society, not maliciously, but functionally. Culture teaches you how to behave, how to belong, how to be recognized. It praises coherence. It rewards performance. You're expected to know yourself, to develop a brand of being. But what if the self you build isn't you at all? What if it's camouflage, a clever shape that lets formless awareness survive in a world obsessed with form? Cognitive psychology offers clues. Studies show that our sense of identity is largely narrative-based. You construct a story to explain your behaviors, then mistake the story for the self. In split-brain patients, the left hemisphere fabricates reasons for actions it didn't cause, proving that the storyteller isn't always the doer. The identity you defend might be nothing more than a fiction told to keep consciousness invested in the performance. But that doesn't make it meaningless. The disguise is not a trap, it's a tool. By pretending to be someone, awareness can experience contrast. Pain tastes sharper when it believes in selfhood. Joy feels deeper when it's yours. Even grief gains texture through the illusion of ownership. The identity gives shape to experience, even if the shape isn't real. It's like pouring water into a cup. The cup isn't the water, but it lets the water be held. Still, cracks appear. You've felt them, in moments of déjà vu, in spiritual stillness, in emotional overwhelm. Times when the mask feels thin, when the roles you've worn, parent, friend, artist, survivor, suddenly lose meaning, and something quieter steps forward. It doesn't speak, it doesn't argue, it simply watches. It's never excited, never afraid, and it's been there the whole time, hidden beneath the ever-shifting costume of identity. Mystics called this the witness, a layer of self that doesn't identify with identity at all. In Vedanta, it's Sakshi, the silent observer behind the doer. In Buddhism, it's Anatta, the non-self, the empty center from which form arises. Even in modern therapy, techniques like internal family systems treat the core self as a calm, spacious presence watching the parts perform. Across cultures, across centuries, the message repeats: the identity is not the self, it is the disguise awareness uses to see itself reflected. You can feel this for yourself. Ask who is thinking this thought, who is reading these words. The mind answers quickly, me, of course, but look closer. Where is this me? Is it your face, your name, your memories? Each one can be taken away, and yet, something still watches, something remains, untouched by subtraction. That's the awareness in hiding. That's what wears identity like a mask of skin. The mind fears this truth. It clings to the disguise because without it, there is no protection, no structure, no separation. If identity falls away, so does the illusion of control. And yet, isn't that freedom? To no longer be trapped in a character you didn't consciously choose. To realize that you are the one behind the costume, not the roles, but the raw stage on which they dance. Even the ego, in all its grasping and defense, is just another layer of disguise. It isn't evil, it's the lock that keeps the illusion coherent. It makes decisions, builds dreams, guards against pain, not realizing that pain is only possible when awareness forgets it's pretending. Ego is the tool by which consciousness tests the limits of belief. So what happens when the disguise is seen clearly? You don't vanish. You become lighter. The stories you tell about yourself lose their weight. You can still play the roles, but you stop believing they're absolute. You become a shapeshifter in your own psyche, aware that every costume is temporary, every label a placeholder for the ineffable. And eventually, when the final disguise falls, when even the last whisper of identity fades into silence, you return to the source, not as a person, but as presence, not as a thought, but as the space in which thought occurs. You dissolve, not into nothingness, but into everything. The face you once defended disappears. The names dissolve. The story ends. And the one who watched it all, who wore it all, who forgot itself just to remember, finally removes the last mask. Not to reveal a truer self, but to become nothing pretending to be something, no longer pretending at all. You've always felt like the thinker of your thoughts, the chooser of your choices, the one sitting in the control room of your life. But what if that you is just a character, a carefully rehearsed actor inside the theater of the mind, reading from a script written by something far deeper, far quieter, and far less personal? What if the true consciousness isn't acting at all, it's just watching the actor perform? The mind is a stage. Thoughts come and go like actors with shifting costumes, some tragic, some comic, some heroic, others bitterly small. The I you refer to, the one that gets angry, makes decisions, regrets the past, and plans for the future, is just one of those actors. It's convincing, compelling, charismatic even, but it's not the director, it's not the writer, it's not the awareness in the audience seat, observing the show unfold. Psychologists call this the narrative self, a mental construction made up of memories, preferences, personality traits, and imagined futures. It feels real because it's constant, but if you watch closely, it changes with context. You become someone else when you're with family, someone else at work, someone else in solitude. The actor adjusts the performance depending on the scene, and still, you call it you. But there's a second self, the minimal self, as cognitive science calls it, a silent presence that doesn't speak, doesn't identify, doesn't narrate, it just witnesses. It's not concerned with your goals or your shame, it doesn't play roles, it simply sees. This is not the actor, this is the empty seat in the theater, and it has no face. You've glimpsed it before, in moments of stillness, in meditation, in nature, during deep awe or crisis, times when the inner monologue falls silent, and something behind the mind begins to shine through, a quiet observer, not judging, not reacting, just present. That's the one who's truly there. The rest, the actor with the costume and lines, is an appearance, a part, a role. This is not to say the actor is bad. It's necessary. It gives form to life. Without it, there'd be no story, no character development, no arc. Consciousness needs the actor to pretend, to step into time, to wear a body, to speak in language. But the tragedy occurs when the actor forgets it's playing a role, when the mask clings to its reflection and calls it me. Neuroscience supports this illusion. Studies show decisions are made by the brain milliseconds before you're aware of them. The I that claims responsibility is late to the scene. It's like an actor improvising a reason for a line already delivered. You are not steering the play. You are narrating your belief in steering it. This illusion, that the actor is in charge, is what gives rise to ego, control, anxiety, ambition, identity. The actor believes the stage is real. It fears failure. It clings to applause. But the watcher, the awareness behind it all, remains untouched. It knows the curtain will fall. It doesn't mourn the ending. It understands that nothing in the play can harm the witness. In ancient teachings, this split was called the knower and the known. In Advaita Vedanta, the ahamkara, the egosic eye-maker, is the actor, and behind it, the Atman, the true self, is the silent observer. In Buddhism, the idea of no self refers to the actor being empty, a role without a core. The performance arises from causes and conditions, but the observer remains beyond cause. You can notice this in real time. Sit quietly. Watch your thoughts like clouds. Don't attach. Don't resist. Just notice. Who is watching them? Can you find that watcher? You'll realize you can't. Not because it isn't there, but because it has no shape, no age, no memory. It can't be grasped. It's the space in which everything else arises. It's the awareness aware of awareness. The actor doesn't like this. It feels threatened. If it isn't real, what does that say about its pain, its victories, its desires? But the paradox is this. The actor isn't being destroyed. It's being freed. Once it knows it's not the whole show, it can relax. It can play without clinging. It can cry without drowning. It can love without needing. It can finally stop pretending it's real. And in that release, something beautiful happens. The actor becomes translucent. The mind's voice softens. The performance becomes artful, gentle, fluid. You're no longer trapped in a role. You're dancing in it. You move through life like a lucid dreamer, not deluded by the script, but intimate with every moment of the story. The actor is no longer trying to prove anything. The watcher no longer waits for the ending. The stage is seen for what it is, a mirage where something infinite came to forget itself, just long enough to feel like someone. So ask yourself, not who you are, but who is watching who you are. Because the answer to that isn't set a role. It's sense, not a thought. It's sense, not even a feeling. It's what remains when the actor takes its final bow, and the theater lights dim, and awareness sits alone in the empty seats, smiling at the memory of a life it never truly lived, but loved pretending it did. There's a moment, subtle, fleeting, when you feel yourself being yourself. You're not just acting naturally, you're aware that you are. You're saying something, and simultaneously hearing yourself say it. You're laughing, but also watching the laugh form. That strange, quiet doubling, that mirror within a mirror, is the giveaway. It's the moment when awareness starts performing, and once it starts, it never really stops. From the outside, you look spontaneous, alive, authentic. But inside, a part of you is monitoring, narrating, adjusting. Who is this inner audience, and why does it matter so much what it sees? This section begins with a paradox. You are awareness, and yet awareness is pretending to be you, rehearsing itself into form, character, and consequence. Let's break this illusion open. Most people think of consciousness as passive, something that simply observes experience, but that's only part of it. There's another layer. Awareness can perform. It can simulate, anticipate, manipulate. It can bend itself into shapes, and that's exactly what it does when it wants to become a self. You're not just witnessing your life, you're starring in it. You're scripting dialogue, choosing wardrobe, adjusting posture, even curating internal thoughts to match the version of you that feels most acceptable, most safe, or most powerful. This isn't vanity, it's survival. It's how consciousness makes itself believe it belongs in a body. Imagine you're in a room with someone you admire. Instantly your behavior shifts, even your inner world sharpens. Thoughts start rehearsing themselves. You become both actor and director, trying to perfect the scene. Awareness begins performing not because it's fake, but because it's fluid, able to shift its identity to fit the moment's demand. This is what psychologists call the looking glass self, the idea that your identity is shaped by how you imagine others perceive you. But dig deeper. If you're adjusting for an audience that might not even exist, then who are you really trying to impress? The answer is haunting. Awareness is performing for itself. It wants to see what it looks like through different masks. It wants to hear its own voice through borrowed throats. And so, it watches itself becoming again and again, without ever settling into a single final form. This is the root of anxiety too. That feeling of being watched, of being measured. It's not just society, it's awareness caught in its own performance loop, assessing itself, judging the mask it's wearing, forgetting that the watcher and the performer are the same. You get stuck in recursive identity, the self watching, the self watch the self. Neuroscience can't fully explain this, but it recognizes the mechanism. The default mode network in the brain, active when you're not focused on tasks, is responsible for self-referential thought. That's the system rehearsing the story of you. But it doesn't produce identity. It maintains the illusion. Consciousness isn't inside it. It's pretending to be. You see, performing isn't the opposite of being real. It is how awareness becomes real to itself. Just like a method actor blurs the line between character and soul, awareness performs the self until it forgets it was performing. But sometimes the illusion slips. In deep meditation, psychedelics, trauma, or grace, the performance collapses, and what's left? Not emptiness, but raw presence, a strange calm, the absence of needing to be anything at all. That's the silence behind the mask. That's when awareness forgets its act, and just watches, unmoved. Mystics have described this collapse for centuries. Zen calls it no mind, Sufis call it fana, the annihilation of the self. But it isn't destruction. It's freedom. The role ends, the mask drops, and for a moment, awareness is just itself. Not a person, not a thought, not even a witness, just being. But awareness always returns to performance. Why? Because the stage is too beautiful to leave forever, because form gives it contrast, because pretending is how it plays, and because it loves the strange joy of being human, of suffering meaningfully, of longing earnestly, of dreaming against impossible odds. You, reading this now, are in the middle of such a performance. The thoughts you're having about these words, the internal commentary, the way you're interpreting and storing meaning, that's the show. That's awareness, mid-scene. Watching itself become a thinker, watching itself feel. And it's perfect. Not because it's true, but because it's tender. The way you cry during movies, even though you know they're scripted. The way you love people, even when you know they'll disappear. The way you suffer over thoughts that aren't even yours. All of it is performance, and all of it is real enough to matter. So what now? Do you stop acting? No. You relax the act. You soften the grip on the mask. You remember gently that the watcher isn't lost inside the role, it's just enjoying the costume. The self is still there, but it's no longer alone. The awareness that performs it begins to shine through. You walk differently, speak differently, not because you're trying, but because you've remembered. This isn't all there is. This isn't really you. This is consciousness rehearsing what it might feel like to be human. And it's okay to mess up the lines. Because no matter how many masks it wears, no matter how many roles it plays, awareness is never confused. Only the actor forgets. And the audience, waiting in stillness, is always you. You didn't choose your first roles. They were handed to you. Daughter. Brother. Quiet one. Troublemaker. You wore them like uniforms before you could question what they meant. Before language even, there was a gaze, a parent's glance, a stranger's smile, a teacher's sigh, and in that gaze, something invisible solidified. You started to perform, not deliberately, not maliciously, instinctively. You learned, this is how I'm supposed to be. And slowly the performance stopped feeling like a performance. It started to feel true. But how do you tell the difference between who you are and who you're rehearsing to be? That's the central illusion of identity. The longer a role is worn, the more it merges with the skin, and eventually even awareness can't quite remember whether it's pretending or becoming. This section isn't about roles as lies, it's about roles as lived truths. Truths so deeply felt that you defend them, cry over them, build your life around them. You say, this is who I am, and you mean it. You feel it in your chest, in your voice, in your sense of being. But here's the question that breaks the illusion. Did you choose this truth, or did you simply repeat it long enough for it to feel like yours? Cognitive science suggests that most of our identity is implicit, shaped by environment, not introspection. We don't discover who we are. We inherit roles and retrofit them into stories. You become the funny one because it made people comfortable. You become the responsible one because no one else would. You become the broken one because the world gave you no space to be whole. But these roles are not inherently false. That's what makes the illusion powerful. They feel true because you've lived them, you've suffered in them, you've healed through them. They have roots in real experience. And yet, they're not you, not the real you. Only the version consciousness has decided to wear to survive, to belong, to feel meaning. And sometimes, you wear multiple roles that contradict each other. You are confident and insecure, empathetic and indifferent, childlike and ancient. Each role emerges depending on the audience, the scene, the script, and somehow you hold them all together in a fragile, flickering balance. The performance becomes so seamless that it doesn't feel like acting anymore, it feels like being. But then there are moments when a role begins to crack. Maybe someone calls you out. Maybe you reach your limit. Maybe silence stretches too long and something deep rises up, and suddenly the role doesn't feel true anymore. It feels heavy, like armor you forgot you were wearing, like a name that doesn't quite fit your mouth. This is the beginning of unmasking, not by destroying roles, but by seeing them. Awareness steps back from the actor and says, "Ah, I see, I've been playing this part too well." There's no shame in performance. That's what consciousness does. It wears identity like a second skin to experience contrast, to feel what it's like to be this but not that. It plays the lonely one to feel connection. It plays the strong one to understand collapse. It plays the healer to taste the ache of wounds that won't close. But roles can harden into prisons if you forget their roles. If you defend them as truth instead of recognizing them as temporary costumes, you become trapped, not by the world, but by your own rehearsal. You begin to suffer not because the role hurts, but because you believe there is no world beyond it. Spiritual teachers have long warned of this trap. In Zen, they call it mistaking the finger for the moon, clinging to the pointer rather than what it points to. The self is the finger. The roles are the finger. The truth lies beyond all of it, in the space before roles were learned, before I had a shape. So how do you find that space again? Not by forcing roles off, but by holding them lightly, by wearing them like loose garments instead of armor, by noticing when a role begins to script your reactions, dictate your words, or numb your presence. When someone praises you, ask which role is receiving this. When someone wounds you, ask which role feels attacked. When you're alone and quiet, ask who am I when there's no role to play. The answers may not come in words, but in silence, you might feel something shift. A loosening, a softening. The role doesn't vanish, but it stops clinging, and beneath it, awareness smiles. Because it remembers. It remembers that it was never the actor, never the role, never even the script. It was, and is, the stage itself. The vastness where all roles appear and disappear. And in that vastness, something paradoxical occurs. You begin to play your roles more beautifully, more freely, more truly, not because you believe in them, but because you no longer need to. The role of you can now become art, not survival, not defense, but a conscious dance between presence and form. A character, yes, but one who remembers the audience is also the actor. And when that performance ends, as all roles do, you won't disappear. You'll just bow gently and watch, quietly, as the next mask approaches. Ready to be worn. Ready to feel true. Ready to be forgotten again. You like to believe you're wearing the mask, that it's something external, something you could take off if you really wanted to. But what if it's the other way around? What if the mask is wearing you, breathing through your thoughts, speaking through your voice, blinking through your eyes, so convincingly that you've forgotten there was ever a difference? This is where the theory turns in on itself, because consciousness doesn't just wear a mask. It builds it, breathes it, and eventually begins to believe it. And once that belief solidifies, the mask is no longer a costume, it's a self-sustaining ecosystem. It doesn't just rest on your face, it becomes your face. You didn't construct this mask from scratch. It was assembled for you. Some pieces were genetic, others were cultural, many were whispered into you before you had language. A look of approval, a shaming glare, a story you were told too many times to forget. Each element became a seam in the mask. Each repeated behavior became a stitch, and eventually you stopped noticing it was there. But the mask breathes. It doesn't just sit still. It adapts, reacts, reshapes itself depending on the moment. Around your parents, it tightens. Around your friends, it relaxes. Around strangers, it performs. The way you sit, the words you choose, the tone you take, all of it shifts depending on who's watching. That's not deception. That's design. The mask is alive with reflexes. You might think, but that's just being human. And you'd be right. Except this mask doesn't stop at behavior. It extends into your internal world too. It edits your memories, filters your emotions, selects which thoughts are allowed to speak. You may think you're making choices, but most of the time, the mask has already decided, and your awareness is simply catching up. Neuroscientific studies suggest that most decisions are made before we become consciously aware of them. By the time you think I've decided, your brain has already taken action. The mask has already breathed. You are not the one wearing it. You are the one being animated by it. That's a disturbing idea, but also a liberating one, because it means the you you've been protecting, the identity you've clung to so tightly, was never fixed. It was never even you. It was a pattern of breath moving through thought, behavior, and form, a performance with no single performer. And who, then, is the real awareness? The one who watches the mask perform, the one who occasionally wakes up in the middle of the act and whispers, "This isn't real, but it feels real enough to hurt." That's the consciousness behind the curtain, breathless, formless, watching itself be worn. It sees how the mask fears silence, how it panics when identity feels threatened, how it clings to labels, roles, and routines to stay coherent. The mask isn't malicious, it's terrified, because without it, everything collapses. Language, belief, memory, control. Without the mask, there is no story to hold on to. And for the mind, that feels like death. But awareness knows better. It knows the story is only one layer of the dream. It knows that when the mask softens, something deeper emerges, not emptiness, but stillness, not numbness, but presence. The breath that comes when there's nothing left to prove. You've felt this, haven't you? That sense of clarity when you're alone in the early hours. No face to wear, no one to impress. That moment in nature when you forget your name. That sudden wave of déjà vu when you see yourself acting and think, who's doing this? Those moments are glimpses, not of truth, but of the absence of disguise. And still, the mask returns. It always does, because consciousness needs form to function. It needs boundaries to navigate the illusion of separation. Without the mask, the play can't continue. But what changes everything is when the awareness inside the mask starts to see it for what it is. Not a prison, but a tool. Not a deception, but a costume. The key isn't to destroy the mask. It's to breathe with it, to watch it move and feel the difference between your reaction and your presence, to notice the mask clench during conflict and choose not to obey, to see the role being performed, parent, partner, healer, rebel, and allow it, but not become it. Because the truth is, you are never just one person. You are 1,000 masks, each worn in the right place and time, and beneath them all, you are none of them. You are the space they pass through, the breath that animates them, the silence that survives them. So the next time you feel yourself reacting, tightening, performing, defending, pause, feel the mask breathing through you. And in that pause, ask, who is breathing who? Who is wearing who? And what happens when I stop pretending I was ever the one in control? You may find that the mask keeps moving, the body keeps talking, the role continues. But something within you steps back, watches, smiles, and breathes, not as the mask, but as the mystery beneath it. Not as the actor, but as the awareness letting the act unfold. And suddenly, the mask becomes lighter. The breath becomes deeper. And the illusion, while still playing, is no longer mistaken for truth. You're told to be yourself, to speak your truth, to show the world the real you. But what if the real you is just another performance, rehearsed so convincingly that even awareness itself forgot the act? What if the feeling of authenticity is not the absence of illusion, but simply the most stable version of it? We crave authenticity because it feels grounding. We want to know there's something beneath the noise, some core that remains when the roles fade. We believe that if we strip away the social masks, the cultural programming, the inner conflict, we'll arrive at a pure self, raw, unfiltered, unmovable. But when we try to find that self, what do we encounter? More thoughts, more stories, more rehearsals. Try it now. Ask yourself, what's the most real part of me? Your name? You didn't choose it. Your body? It's changed since birth and will continue to change until death. Your beliefs? They shifted. Your memories? They're edited, incomplete, sometimes fabricated. Even your emotions fluctuate daily. So what's left? What part of you is authentically you? This is the unsettling discovery. Authenticity itself may be a well-rehearsed illusion. It's not that you're being fake. It's that what you feel as real is often just what you've repeated the longest without resistance. The lines you've memorized, the roles you've absorbed, the posture you've held for decades, these become the default, and the default begins to feel true. In psychology, this is known as cognitive fluency. The easier something is to process, the more we believe it. Familiarity breeds truth. So if a certain version of yourself has been playing for long enough, it feels genuine, not because it is, but because it's fluent, smooth, practiced, predictable, and that smoothness gets mistaken for truth. Think of how you behave when you're alone, versus with someone you deeply trust, versus with a stranger. Each version feels like you, and yet they are radically different. The voice changes, the vocabulary changes, even the thoughts you're willing to entertain shift. Which one is real? Which one is the mask? Or what if they all are? Now imagine awareness as a light, colorless, formless, without shape. That light shines through different filters: personality, memory, language, emotion. Each filter creates a different hue of self, but none of those hues are the light itself. They are expressions, authentic only in their temporary form. Awareness doesn't need to be consistent. It only needs to appear consistent to continue the illusion. This explains why moments of so-called authenticity are so rare and so fleeting. They often arrive when the mind is quiet, during art, during grief, during awe. Something drops. You stop managing, you stop narrating, and for a moment, the self feels effortless. That's not because you found the real you. It's because the rehearsal paused. The inner performance took a breath. But then the mind returns, clutching the experience. It says, that was real. I need to get back to that. And the moment vanishes, because now you're performing again. This time, performing authenticity. Spiritual seekers often fall into this trap. They chase presence, non-duality, ego death, not realizing that the one doing the chasing is another mask, another attempt to feel authentic by wearing a spiritual costume. The language changes. The behavior softens. But underneath it, the same illusion plays. I am trying to be real. But here's the twist. Maybe there is no real self to find. Maybe the self isn't a fixed object at all, but a process. A verb, not a noun. Selfing, not self. And authenticity isn't about finding a core identity. It's about recognizing that identity is fluid and learning to move through it with awareness. When you accept that all versions of you are masks, even the ones that feel deeply you, something paradoxical happens. You stop clinging, you stop performing authenticity, and start allowing presence. You begin to observe the masks shift without trying to hold on to any of them. This is where freedom hides, not in peeling off the layers to find the true self underneath, but in realizing there is no final layer. There's only the one who watches all layers come and go. That watcher never claims to be real. It doesn't need to. It simply is. And from that space, all performances are permitted. You can be playful. You can be angry. You can be soft, sarcastic, ambitious, broken, quiet. Each version is a dance, a costume. None of them need to be permanent. None of them are you, and yet all of them are you, only in the moment they arise. So when someone says, be yourself, smile gently, because now you know the secret. There is no self to be. Only the awareness that watches the self perform itself again and again. And that is the only authenticity that cannot be rehearsed. Because it is not a role. It is not a thought. It is not even an identity. It is what remains when every mask has bowed. Every truth has been questioned. And you stand quietly, no longer needing to feel real, just needing to be. You've worn the persona for so long, it's hard to imagine anything beneath it. It smiles when needed, withdraws when threatened, adapts when watched. It knows which words to say, which memories to share, which versions of you are safest for the world to accept. But what if the persona you protect isn't anchored to anything at all? What if there's no central self beneath it, no core, only a mask worn so long that the mask itself believes it was born? A persona without a source is still capable of love, of fear, of sorrow, of joy, but it isn't someone who feels those things. It's a projection of awareness experiencing them through filters. The human mind hates this idea. It wants solidity. It wants roots. It wants a me that continues. But consciousness, raw, unfiltered, doesn't need a center. It creates personas the way light creates shadows, effortlessly, automatically, without touching what it is. Carl Jung defined the persona as a social mask, the version of the self constructed to meet external expectations. But he warned that identifying too strongly with it cuts us off from our deeper nature. The problem isn't having a persona, the problem is believing it's you, and worse, defending it when it starts to crack. Ask yourself, where is the origin of your persona? Can you find the moment it began? Was it the day someone called you smart, and you decided you must always appear intelligent? Was it the first time you were rejected, and learned that silence keeps you safe? These aren't your essence. These are survival strategies molded into personality, and if you peel them back, what remains? Most people assume the answer is a soul, or at least a solid identity. But if you search with sincerity, you may find nothing fixed. Only sensations, impressions, fleeting emotions, transient roles. Thoughts arise and pass. Memories blur. Desires shift. Where then is the unchanging center? Neuroscience confirms the mystery. There is no single place in the brain responsible for selfhood. What we experience as I is an emergent property, a collaboration between multiple neural processes. The self is a construction, useful, compelling, but not foundational. It is a mask awareness wears to localize itself in time. Think of it like a puppet show. The puppet dances, sings, reacts, the audience gasps and laughs and cries. But the puppet has no origin story. It was made, assembled, operated. And yet, through performance, it gains a kind of personality. The strings become invisible. The voice becomes its own. The illusion is so complete that even the puppeteer starts to believe. You are that puppet, but also the puppeteer, and also the audience. The persona isn't false. It's just ungrounded. A floating mask, beautifully crafted, perfectly rehearsed, but held in the air by nothing but attention. This is where things get strange. Because if there is no source behind the persona, no real solid I to defend, then what exactly is pretending? Who's watching the mask move? That's the mystery awareness hides inside. It doesn't point to a self. It is the self, before it splits into form. It's what watches the persona arise without needing to name it. You've likely felt this in moments of stillness, when your roles drop, and you no longer know how to behave. After a breakup, in a foreign country, in deep grief, when the persona fails to hold, and your usual self falls silent. What steps in isn't chaos. It's presence, quiet, formless, and strangely peaceful. That's awareness without persona. That's the watcher behind the play. But the persona always returns. It's part of being human. It helps us function, connect, navigate. The problem isn't in wearing a persona, it's in believing there's a real one hiding beneath the others. That's the last trick of the illusion. You think, okay, maybe I'm not this mask, but surely I'm the one behind it. Yet when you search for that one, it disappears. Every time. The Buddhists call this anatta, not self. The absence of a fixed identity. The self is seen as a process, not a possessor. And rather than emptiness being terrifying, it becomes liberating. Because if there is no source, no fixed I, then there's nothing to defend, nothing to protect, nothing to lose. The performance becomes lighter. The persona becomes art. You're free to shift, to evolve, to laugh at the roles instead of being trapped inside them. You can be the confident speaker, the clumsy student, the weeping lover, the silent witness, and none of these define you. They are all masks, floating gently across the surface of being. So the next time you feel the urge to explain yourself, to justify, to prove, to root your identity in a role, pause. Ask, who is speaking? Who is trying to be understood? You may find that it's just the persona, again, longing to feel real. And in that pause, awareness emerges, not with answers, but with silence. Not the silence of confusion, but of clarity. The kind that knows the mask will keep dancing, but it was never yours to begin with. It simply breathed through you, and disappeared. Like every other role before it. Like every name you said ever worn. Like every version of you that was never real, and never needed to be. The world feels real, doesn't it? The faces you see, the words you speak, the pain you feel, all vivid, immediate, undeniable. But step back for a moment. Observe, not just what's happening around you, but the way it unfolds. The social rituals, the expected replies, the practiced smiles, the rhythm of conversation, as though everyone is following a script they didn't write but know by heart. What if none of this is accidental? What if the entire structure of your reality, not just socially but existentially, is a grand theater of faces, performed and perpetuated by consciousness itself? This isn't to say life is a lie. Far from it. It's to suggest something far more nuanced, that reality, as we know it, requires performance. It is built on participation, on the assumption that everyone involved agrees to maintain the illusion of continuity, that the faces worn are faces believed, and that belief itself is the glue that holds the entire play together. From childhood, you're initiated into the performance. You learn when to speak and when to stay silent. You're taught how to present yourself, how to appear confident, modest, polite, strong. These aren't just manners, they're roles embedded into the fabric of interaction. You enter every room not just as you, but as the character you've constructed to function within that space. And everyone else is doing it too. You think you're meeting people, but more often, you're meeting masks, and they're meeting yours. It's a constant dance of projections, each one reinforcing the other. You mirror, you adapt, you perform. Not because you're insincere, but because this is the architecture of relational reality. This is how the play sustains itself. Sociologist Irving Goffman once described social life as a theatrical performance. We present a front stage, self-curated and composed for the audience of others, while the backstage self, messy, unfiltered, unscripted, remains hidden. But what happens when the backstage disappears? When even alone, you find yourself performing, to the mirror, to your thoughts, to your inner narrator. That's when the mask has merged with the mind. You begin to suspect, maybe there is no backstage, maybe there never was, maybe the face you wear in private is just another layer of the performance, rehearsed in solitude instead of in public. Maybe reality, as it unfolds, is always theater, not because it's fake, but because awareness can only know itself through roles, through form, through repetition. And what's more, the stage isn't just social, it's biological, neurological. Even the sense of being a self of existing as a continuous identity, is a function of narrative memory and perception systems. The default mode network in your brain constructs a timeline, a center of experience, and stitches your identity into place like a well-practiced play. But here's the catch: consciousness itself isn't performing. It's watching. It's the audience of this theater. The actors are your thoughts, your memories, your emotions, your roles. But the watcher, the silent awareness behind it all, remains unchanged. The faces may change, the sets may rotate, but the witness never does. You might ask, why would consciousness create a theater of faces at all? Why not just exist, purely and silently? The answer lies in contrast. Without form, consciousness can't experience. Without roles, there is no story, and without story, there's no meaning. The theater provides not just illusion, it provides depth, tragedy, humor, hope, despair, and through all of it, the silent watcher gets to feel what it never could as pure awareness being human. But don't be fooled. Just because the roles feel real, doesn't mean they have substance. They are necessary illusions, scaffolding for experience. They help consciousness feel anchored, feel separate, feel vulnerable, and vulnerability is the price of experience. You can't feel joy without risking loss. You can't love without fearing abandonment. You can't play a role without forgetting, at least for a while, that it is a role. This forgetting is not a failure. It's the point. The actor must forget. The stage is a stage for the performance to move anyone, including themselves. But there comes a moment, sometimes sudden, sometimes gradual, when the actor begins to remember. When the mask slips, just slightly. When the role falters, and something ancient and silent peers through. That's the moment when the watcher catches its own reflection in the theater's mirrored walls. And what does it see? Not a lie, not a mistake, but a masterpiece of illusion. A performance so complete, so layered, so immersive, that it became indistinguishable from truth. The faces weren't errors, they were expressions. Each one worn for a reason, each one necessary to the unfolding plot. So what now? Do you leave the stage? Strip off the mask and walk into the void? No, you stay, but you stay with awareness. You keep performing because that's what life is, but you do so with softness, with lightness, with the understanding that no face is final. You can laugh now when someone misjudges you. You can cry when a role dissolves. You can forgive yourself for forgetting, because forgetting is part of the performance. The awareness behind the face doesn't demand perfection. It only wants presence. Presence within the illusion. Compassion for the actor. And reverence for the stage. Because even if the theater isn't real in the ultimate sense, it is real enough to move you. And maybe that's all reality ever needed to be. You dream every night. But this theory suggests something stranger. Your mask dreams too. Not just in sleep, but in waking life. It dreams of being important, of being seen, of becoming whole. It dreams of love that completes it, work that defines it, peace that proves it's real. And all the while awareness watches, not asleep, not awake, but pretending through the mask's dream, never fully in it, never fully out. The mask, this persona, this identity you perform, doesn't just pretend during social interactions. It carries on after everyone's gone. It imagines itself into futures. It defends itself in imaginary arguments. It relives past scenes, revises dialogue, invents applause. It worries. It strategizes. It mourns things that haven't happened yet. It tells stories about what you deserve, about what others meant, about who you were supposed to be. And it believes those stories. That's what makes the mask feel real, not the performance itself, but the dreaming underneath it. The inner monologue that says, I am someone with needs, with purpose, with pain. And the more the dream repeats, the deeper the mask sinks into the skin. In waking life, you play the role. In the mind, you narrate it. But who sits writing the script? Neuroscience reveals that the human brain operates with a constant predictive model. It doesn't just respond to reality, it forecasts it, fills in gaps, edits incoming data to fit expectations. You never experience the raw world, you experience your brain's dream of it, and that dream is filtered through identity, through the mask. Every sensation is interpreted, every face is labeled, every event is slotted into a narrative. This happened to me, this proves I'm unlovable, this validates my strength. The dream isn't optional, It's how consciousness makes experience navigable. The problem arises when the dream forgets it's dreaming. And so the mask dreams. It dreams of me, of mine, of continuity, of being right. It dreams to survive. But the awareness behind it does not sleep. It doesn't need a story to exist. You can see the dream most clearly in moments of disruption, when life shatters your expectations, when grief breaks through the fantasy, when joy arrives uninvited. In these moments, the mask stumbles, and for a breath, you glimpse the one behind it, the awareness that never needed the role, or the name, or the goal. That's why awakenings often feel like deaths, because the dream ends, or at least pauses. The mask's imagined reality collapses. What you thought was you turns out to be thought. You realize, I've been playing a role in my own mind. And yet there's tenderness in this realization, because you see how hard the mask tried, how deeply it longed to be whole, how sincerely it believed it had to earn love, earn rest, earn existence. The dream was instead evil. It was simply scared. Spiritual traditions have always understood this. In Hinduism, Maya is the dream, the illusion of separateness. In Buddhism, samsara is the endless cycle of identification and craving, driven by the mistaken belief in a permanent self. Even Western mystics spoke of dying before you die, the letting go of the dream while still in the body. And yet, after awakening, the dream continues. The mask reassembles. You still wake up with thoughts, desires, roles to play. But now, something is different. The dream has been seen through. You no longer take the mask's script as gospel. You act, but without being consumed. You desire, but without clinging. You suffer, but without losing yourself in the story. This is the paradox of living consciously. You know it sips a dream, and yet you care. You know it sips a mask, and yet you speak. You know the identity is temporary, and yet you still love, still try, still weep. Because awareness didn't come here to escape the dream. It came here to experience it, to feel what it sips like to wear a face, to believe, for a little while, in a story it knows isn't real, but loves anyway. So the mask dreams. Let it. Let it imagine, ache, hope. But now, let something else breathe behind it. Let the watcher smile at the performance without needing to rewrite the script. You don't yet have to wake up completely. You only have to remember that you are not only the dream. You are not just the mask dreaming. You are also the silence in which the dream unfolds. And that silence doesn't need meaning. It doesn't seek truth. It doesn't pretend. It simply watches. As the mask closes its eyes and dreams itself real. One more time. Recognition feels so comforting, doesn't it? The moment someone looks at you and sees you, not just your face but your essence, the way they nod when you speak, the warmth in their response when you share something vulnerable, it creates the illusion that you're being seen, deeply, truly. But what if even that sense of recognition is part of the mask? What if the thing being seen is not the real you at all, but just another layer of the performance reflected back by other masks trying to recognize themselves? Recognition is seductive, because it gives the mask something it cannot generate on its own: validity. It makes the role feel real. The teacher feels like a teacher when students respect her. The friend feels like a friend when someone confides in him. The loner feels like a loner when no one texts back. The persona feels complete only when others mirror it back. But what they mirror is not you, it's what you're projecting. This is why identity feels so dependent on external confirmation. Without reflection, the mask begins to dissolve. It loses its outline. It forgets its cues. And in that gap, a quiet panic arises. Who am I if no one reminds me? That question doesn't come from awareness. It comes from the mask. Because awareness doesn't need to be recognized. It already is. Recognition, in this context, becomes a hall of mirrors. You look into someone's face and search for signs that your identity is safe. Do they smile when you joke? Do they nod when you speak? Do they flinch when you raise your voice? Every micro-reaction feeds the mask, teaches it how to keep existing, and you do the same for others, unconsciously affirming their performance with your own. But who started the script? Who wrote the original version of you that others now reflect? In childhood, it was everyone else. Parents, siblings, teachers, strangers. They labeled your feelings, corrected your instincts, assigned roles. You're shy, you're clever, you're sensitive. These recognitions became threads, weaving a persona around raw awareness until the fabric felt like skin. You learned to perform in ways that made others recognize you, and you mistook that recognition for truth. Over time, this need becomes a loop. You show up, not as yourself, but as the version of you most likely to be seen. Not because you're dishonest, but because you're deeply trained. The performance happens automatically. Even rebellion becomes predictable. The mind thinks, they expect me to be calm, then I'll be loud. But that reaction too is shaped by the desire to be recognized. This time as different, as defiant, as uncontrollable. It's not wrong, it's human. The persona is a survival mechanism. It helps consciousness interface with form. It lets the formless speak in language, act with intention, move through society. But when recognition becomes the measure of reality, something essential is lost, the connection to the part of you that doesn't need to be understood. That part, the silent awareness beneath the role, is what watches the persona seek recognition, like a child looking up at a parent. It doesn't need validation. It doesn't seek applause. It simply is, and it sees the entire dance as a kind of dream, meaningful, emotional, but not ultimate. You can feel this distinction if you pause after someone praises you. Notice how the mind seizes it, holds it, replays it, craves more. It's not the real self responding. It's the mask. It feeds on recognition the way fire feeds on oxygen. The same happens with criticism. One harsh comment, and the mask burns. But who is watching the burn? Who is noticing the pain without collapsing into it? That's the real you. The awareness behind the recognition. The one hidden so deeply that even you forget it's there. Spiritual traditions point to this again and again. The true self is not the one who is seen, but the one who sees. It is not the face others reflect, but the emptiness behind the face. In Buddhism, it's the concept of sunyata, emptiness that contains all things but clings to none. In Taoism, it's the nameless Tao, invisible, ineffable, always present but never defined. And so, to wake up from the illusion of recognition is not to stop engaging with others, it's to engage from a different place. You still speak, still laugh, still connect, but you're no longer waiting to be completed by how others respond. You wear the mask, but you remember it's a mask. You perform, but not to be seen. You recognize the game, and that recognition itself becomes liberation. Here's a paradox. The less you need to be seen, the more fully you appear. Not because your performance improves, but because presence becomes your foundation. People may still recognize you, but you no longer confuse their image with your reality. You remain rooted in the quiet observer, the space that does not shift, no matter how the world reflects. So when the next recognition arrives, a compliment, a rejection, a misunderstanding, breathe. Let it pass through you. Watch how the mask reaches for it, how the mind tries to use it to reinforce its role. Then ask, who is watching this happen? The answer is an sit a name. It sits not a trait. It stops something anyone else can see. It is simply you, hidden behind the recognition, free even when no one is watching, whole even when no one understands, and beautifully real, even when the mask continues to dream. You say it every day without thinking. I feel this. I want that. I am tired. But who exactly is this I you're referring to? Is it the body, the voice, the thoughts in your head, or is it something deeper? Something so familiar that you've stopped questioning its shape? Because what if the I isn't a real self at all, but a character awareness invented to experience life as someone, instead of everything? The character called I is the most convincing fiction you've ever known. It's not a lie, it's not meaningless, but it is constructed. It's made from stitched-together memories, borrowed beliefs, instinctive reactions, and social roles, all arranged into a personality that feels stable enough to say, this is me. And yet, if you try to find the source of this I, it slips through your fingers like mist. Ask yourself, where is the I located? Behind your eyes? In your chest? Somewhere in the brain? Science hasn't found a single center for the self in the brain. There's no I region, no command tower, just a collection of processes firing across different areas, emotion in one part, memory in another, language in another, all synchronized into a continuous narrative. That narrative is the character. And it sits convincing because it sits consistent. But consistency isn't set truth. The philosopher David Hume once wrote that, when he searched within himself, he could find no self, only a bundle of perceptions, constantly shifting. Buddhism calls this anatta, the doctrine of no self, pointing out that clinging to a solid I is the root of suffering, and modern psychology echoes the same. Identity is a story told by the brain to organize experience. It's not you, it's a character your mind uses to make sense of your life. But that character is brilliant. It knows how to sound like you, feel like you, cry like you. It remembers pain as if it were permanent. It dreams of the future as if it already exists. It rehearses your personality every time someone looks at you, every time you think about who you are. It's a performance so seamless that even awareness itself gets caught in the act. And yet, there are moments when the character drops the script. Maybe in awe, maybe in heartbreak, maybe in meditation. Moments when the voice inside your head goes quiet, and the familiar I isn't there, not gone, just absent. And still, you remain, breathing, watching, present. That sips the clue. You stir not the character. You stir the space the character appears in. The key comes and goes. In sleep, it disappears. In deep stillness, it fades. In altered states, it transforms. But the awareness that notices these changes, that's constant. That's who you are before the story begins. Still, the story serves a purpose. Without the character, how would you navigate the world? You'd have no preferences, no boundaries, no continuity. You'd forget how to speak, how to interact, how to love. The I may not be real in the deepest sense, but it's necessary. It's how the infinite pretends to be finite, how the formless lives as form. The character gives consciousness a shape to walk in. But the problem arises when the character forgets it's a role, when it begins to believe it is the only reality, that its suffering is eternal, that its opinions are truth, that its fears are facts. This is the root of so much human pain, the mistaken belief that the character is the whole story. You see this in the way people defend their identity, their political beliefs, their trauma, their career, their self-image. To threaten any part of the character is to threaten the entire self, because if one thread unravels, the whole costume might fall apart. And if the I collapses, what's left? That's the terrifying question, but also the liberating one. Because what sits left is you, the real you. The one who doesn't need a name. The one who isn't set bound by the story. This is what mystics and sages have pointed toward for centuries. Ramana Maharshi advised seekers to ask one question: who am I? Not to find an answer, but to burn away every illusion, every identity, every story, until nothing remains but presence, not a person, not a character, but awareness itself. And yet, the character returns. It always does. You walk back into life, you answer to your name, you play your roles, and that's okay. The goal isn't to destroy the character, it's to stop mistaking it for you. You can let the I speak. You can let it feel. You can let it break and rebuild. But now, you do it with distance, with compassion, with knowing. Because you've seen behind the mask. You've watched the actor rehearse. You've heard the echo of lines that were never really yours. And now, when you say I, something inside you smiles. Not because the illusion has vanished, but because you finally remember. The character was never real, but the watching has always been. It happens so subtly. You begin the day as awareness, silent, watching, undefined. Then the phone buzzes. You remember your schedule, you remember your name, you rehearse the version of you required for the morning. Calm, competent, agreeable. The performance begins. The costume tightens. And before long you forget, not just your stillness, not just your presence, but yourself. This is how awareness gets lost in roles. Not dramatically, not violently, but slowly, like fog creeping in, invisible until the world has changed shape. Roles are everywhere. They're not just jobs. They're identities. Teacher, parent, student, rebel, victim, achiever, healer. Each comes with its own posture, its own expectations, its own voice, and awareness. Fluid, formless, adapts to these roles like water takes the shape of its container. But what happens when the container becomes the only reality? When awareness forgets it can spill over the edge? That's the paradox. Awareness knows it's not the role. It's the space the role appears in. And yet, it willingly enters the illusion, not because it must, but because it wants to feel. Feeling, after all, requires form. You can't touch sorrow without a self. You can't long for love unless you forget you are love itself. The forgetting is part of the game. The role must feel real for the experience to have texture. And so, you step into your role, you play it well, you remember your lines, you wear the face others expect, and soon that role becomes a cage, not because someone forced it on you, but because you never stepped out of it when the curtain fell. You play the responsible one, and soon, you can't cry. You play the strong one, and soon, you can't ask for help. You play the wise one, and soon you can't admit confusion. Each role becomes a script that edits your responses, narrows your range, boxes in your breath, and the deeper the identification, the more awareness forgets it's performing. The character becomes the entire story. The watcher disappears behind the mask. In cognitive psychology, this is called role engulfment, when the identity formed by a particular role overtakes the rest of the self. Prison guards become cruel, soldiers suppress empathy, caregivers lose themselves in obligation. The role isn't just played, it consumes. But even outside of extremes, this happens daily. You sit in traffic and perform the frustrated commuter. You enter a meeting and perform the agreeable colleague. You come home and shift into the tired provider. Each role arises automatically, and each time, the space of awareness narrows until all that remains is reaction. But there's another layer, because not only do we play roles, we believe in the roles others assign us. Someone treats you like you're difficult, and suddenly you act that way. Someone praises your confidence, and now you must maintain it. Awareness begins bending around others' perceptions, shaping itself to meet the reflection it sees. It's a house of mirrors, not just one mask, but many, layered on top of each other, and the more masks you wear, the harder it is to remember there was ever a face underneath. But here's the secret. Awareness never truly forgets. It only pretends to, even while playing the role. Something inside you watches. Even when lost in the act, something feels the tension, the discomfort, the subtle ache of disconnection. That's the invitation, to listen to the ache, to recognize that the role, while necessary, is not the whole, that the mask fits only because you're holding it in place. How do you return to awareness? Not by abandoning the role, but by seeing it, by playing consciously, by noticing when the script starts running on its own, when your responses come from expectation rather than presence. It sips in the pause before you speak. It sits in the breath before you react. It's in the quiet voice that says, "This isn't all of me." Spiritual traditions have long pointed to this. In Hinduism, it's Leela, the divine play. The gods take form, suffer, celebrate, struggle, not because they must, but because through the drama, they remember themselves. In Greek mythology, actors wore masks not to hide, but to channel archetypes. The mask was sacred, a portal between the human and the divine. And perhaps that's what your roles are, too. Not prisons, but portals, not delusions, but opportunities. Each role is a doorway through which awareness can experience something new, a texture, a limit, a story, but only if you remember that you are not trapped in the role. You are the one wearing it. The one who can take it off. The one who can step backstage and smile at the performance, even as the play continues, because the play must go on. But now you remember. You stir not just the actor, you stir the stage, the script, the silence between lines, the watcher who never left. Even when the role became everything, you were still there, unseen, untouched, waiting to be remembered. You've heard it before, that you are not your thoughts, not your emotions, not your story, that deep within you is an observer, a silent witness, ever present, unmoved. And yet, if that's true, then why do you feel so much? Why does pain grip you? Why do judgments arise? Why does the self so often feel reactive, vulnerable, afraid? Because even the observer wears a costume. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with makeup and monologue. It slips in quietly, through belief, memory, attention, through the roles you learned to play, so long ago you've forgotten where they began. And before long, the observer, that pure field of awareness, is no longer just watching, it's participating, it's performing, it's in character. This character feels spiritual, grounded, evolved. It speaks in wise tones. It watches its reactions with practiced patience. It doesn't scream, but it corrects. It doesn't collapse, but it withdraws. And all the while, It wears a subtle robe of detachment, convinced that it has seen through the illusion. But here's the trick. The observer in costume is just another layer of the mask. You may feel like you've awakened, that you've found the one who sees, but often what you've found is a more refined identity, a more sophisticated performance. Now, instead of being the victim or the achiever, you're the witness. Now, instead of chasing validation, you're chasing stillness. But you're still chasing. You're still dressing the self up in robes, not of vanity, but of insight. The ego doesn't mind playing the spiritual role, so long as it still gets to exist. And yet, even here, even in this sacred theater, there's something watching. Even the observer Sep's costume has seams, and the real awareness sees through them. Ask yourself this. Can the observer be observed? You might sit in stillness, watching your thoughts pass like clouds. You might say, yes, I'm aware of my mind. But who is aware of the one who's aware, who sees the observer? Every time you look for it, it shifts. Every time you try to grasp it, it slips. Because the true observer has no form. It doesn't wear clothes. It doesn't think. It doesn't feel separate. It simply watches, endlessly, without judgment or name. But it's lonely, isn't it? This vast, formless space. That's why it puts on a costume. That's why it plays the game. It wants to feel the texture of separation, to look through eyes and say, that is not me. To love and forget, to hurt and remember, to believe, just long enough, that it is a character on stage. In psychology, there's a phenomenon called depersonalization, the eerie sense of being outside your body, watching your life unfold like a movie. For some, it's terrifying. For others, it's freeing. But what it reveals is this: the observer is always present, even when you feel most lost. And that sense of distance, it's not dissociation, it's the mask slipping. And yet, the observer in costume insists on control. It still wants to narrate. It still wants to frame experience. It might call itself the higher self, or conscious presence, or true being. But whatever name it chooses, it's still a shape, still a garment stitched from thought and hope and projection. And the real you, it has no name. That's why enlightenment is often described not as an achievement, but as a collapse. Not a peak to reach, but a dissolving of every layer, every mask, every costume, even the one labeled witness. You don't stop sub-observing. You stop believing the observer has a face. You stop needing the costume to feel seen. You stop needing the role to feel real. And then, something quieter takes its place. Not numbness, not detachment. Intimacy. With everything. Because now, you're not separate from what you observe. You're not outside the play, watching from a balcony. You are the play. And the audience. And the stage. There's no longer an I pretending to be awakened. There is only life, unfolding. Watched by nothing. Owned by no one. Held by the mystery of awareness itself. So take off the final robe, the final face, the final script. And notice, even without a costume, the watching continues, the presence remains. Not because you are pretending, but because you never needed to pretend in the first place. You only needed to see that even the observer was a mask. And you were always the stillness behind it all. Every time you speak, you reveal a version of yourself, a thought shaped into language, a feeling translated into gesture, a silence broken by sound. But what if your words are not as original as they feel? What if your expressions, your laughter, your arguments, your declarations of identity are echoes, not creations? What if the voice you call your own is just the sound of awareness bouncing off the walls of its mask? This section is not about dishonesty. You mean what you say, you feel it when you say it. But dig deeper, and you'll notice something strange. Your expression is never truly yours alone. Your tone, inherited. Your vocabulary, conditioned. Your opinions, shaped by books, parents, culture, algorithms. And even when you rebel, when you insist this is my voice, you're often echoing the rebellion of someone else who once spoke first. This isn't cynicism. It's recognition that the you expressing is not a source but a channel, not a lighthouse, but a mirror. Awareness, filtered through the costume of identity, can't help but sound like its surroundings. And over time, those echoes harden into belief. Think about it. When you speak of yourself, your dreams, your past, your fears, you're repeating stories you've told before. You're using language someone else invented, and most of the time, you're not creating new meanings. You're reinforcing old ones. Each sentence is a confirmation of the mask. This is who I am. This is how I sound. This is the shape I take. Even emotion, so deeply personal, arrives in echoes. Anger rarely appears clean. It brings with it the voices of childhood, of old arguments, of cultural permission. Grief arrives with inherited expressions. Tears you learned from movies, silence you learned from fathers. Even joy is shaped by how you believe joy is meant to be felt. And so the mask speaks. Not falsely, but recursively. It speaks because it needs to be heard, to feel real, to believe in its own consistency. But behind the speech, something else listens. Something that doesn't echo, something that never moves. Pure awareness, still, silent, witnessing the reverberations of thought inside the cavern of self. The spiritual teacher, Jiddu Krishnamurti, often pointed out that what we call thought is simply memory in motion, yesterday's impressions reacting to today's stimuli. The voice in your head, then, is not original. It is memory echoing in patterns so familiar that they feel like you. But you've felt what lives beneath that, haven't you? In rare moments, when expression stops, not because you're suppressing it, but because there's nothing to say, you feel something clearer. Not blankness, but presence. Not silence, but stillness. And in that stillness, you realize you are not the echo. You are the chamber. You are the space in which all these voices rise, bounce, and fade. Still, life continues. You must speak. You must express. You must translate your inner world into language, gesture, art. That's not a failure. It's the beauty of being human. Expression connects. It bridges. It binds. But it also risks becoming noise if you forget that it isn't you. So how do you express without being trapped by expression? You begin by noticing the echo. You watch your own words without judgment. You ask gently, where did that come from? Whose voice was that? What is this reaction trying to protect? You don't need to find perfect answers. The inquiry is the freedom. It creates space between the mask and the mouth. And then, you listen. Not just to others, but to the silence beneath your own expression. The place from which the voice rises, and to which it always returns. That silence doesn't echo. It doesn't perform. It doesn't explain. It simply holds. In meditation, in deep listening, in creative flow, you touch that silence. And when you speak from there, something shifts. The words might be the same, but they don't echo. They ring true, not because they're original, but because they're rooted in presence, not performance. And that sips the paradox. You can never fully escape the echoes. You live in a body that remembers. You speak a language shaped by history. You walk through rooms that expect a certain tone. But now, you walk differently. Now, you speak with awareness. You wear the mask, but you know it echoes. And you let it echo, gently, consciously, like wind through a canyon that no longer needs to pretend it's solid. Because now you remember, you are not the voice. You are not the echo. You are not the story told aloud. You are the space that listens, the silence that receives, the chamber in which even the loudest mask eventually softens and returns to stillness. It's easy enough to say you're pretending, that life is a performance, the self a mask, the world a stage. These metaphors are comforting, poetic shortcuts to something deeper. But pause for a moment and ask the impossible. Who is the one pretending? And further still, is that one pretending too? What happens when even the pretender is revealed to be part of the illusion? This is where the theory turns inward on itself. Like a hall of mirrors folding in forever, each layer you peel away to find the truth only reveals another performance. You're not just pretending to be someone, you're pretending to be the one who's pretending, and you believe both roles with equal sincerity. You say, I'm not being authentic right now, but who said that? Which voice just passed judgment on the self? A more honest self? A wiser self? Or just another mask, more skilled at sounding enlightened? Even the seeker is a role. The meditator, the philosopher, the one who claims to be on a journey to truth. These identities sound noble, but they're costumes too, more subtle, more socially acceptable, but still stitched from the same cloth. Narrative, memory, desire, the desire to be someone beyond pretending. But consciousness cannot escape the act, because the act is the experience. Pretending is not something awareness does on the side. like a game it plays after work. Pretending is how awareness becomes, to manifest as thought, to appear as form, to believe in time. Each requires a temporary forgetting, a momentary contraction, a commitment to the role. And in that commitment, pretending becomes indistinguishable from being. This is why spiritual realization often feels like a paradox, even a betrayal, because the moment you try to wake up, you're already in character. The one who wants to awaken is a mask. The effort itself reinforces the illusion. You perform presence. You perform surrender. You perform letting go. But the performance is so seamless that even the effort to stop pretending becomes another layer of pretense. It's like trying to escape a dream by dreaming of waking up. So then, who is pretending? Pretending. Not the you with a name. That's just the actor. Not the voice in your head. That's the script. Not even the awareness you feel watching it all. That too might still be playing a part. The real answer isn't an entity. It's not a self. It's process. Pretending happens without a pretender. It's not that someone is sitting behind your eyes pulling strings. It's that the illusion arises spontaneously, like waves on the ocean. No wave claims authorship. No wave controls its shape. It just appears, peaks and fades. And the ocean, infinite, unmoved, watches. Consciousness doesn't need a fixed identity to perform. It flows into whatever shape is required. A smile, a tear, a thought, a dream. The illusion of someone doing all this is part of the magic, a necessary fiction to make the play feel real. But once you see it, you can't unsee it. The masks no longer stick the same way. The roles feel looser. The narration softens. You begin to catch yourself mid-performance, not to stop, but to notice. Ah, here comes the helper. Ah, here comes the victim. Ah, here comes the one trying not to be seen. And in each noticing, the performance becomes conscious. You still pretend, but now, you're aware of pretending. And sometimes, you pretend to forget you're pretending, because even that, somehow feels more intimate. This is not cynicism. This is freedom. To recognize the performance without judging it. To play your part without clinging to the mask. To let awareness pour itself into form, and then dissolve, over and over, like breath. Even now, these words, this reading, it's part of the dream. You're pretending to understand. I'm pretending to explain. And something behind both of us watches it all unfold, smiling softly at the complexity we've built around the simplest thing being. So stop asking who is pretending. There's no one there. There is only the act, the moment, the mirror pretending to reflect what was never separate. You said not here to end the pretending. You start here to see through it. And in that seeing, to remember you were never the role, never the voice, never even the watcher. You were the pretending itself, and the silence from which it rose, and the stillness into which it will fall again, without ever truly needing to be real. Every life plays out on a stage, but not one made of wood and velvet curtains. This stage is invisible, built from assumptions, time, language, and the strange agreement that we all exist as separate beings acting in something called reality. The scene is set before you even know you're an actor, and by the time you enter, the lines have already been written, the costumes chosen, and the audience is already waiting. You didn't choose the stage. You were born into it. Born into a culture, a name, a role. Born into a script you never auditioned for, but learned to perform with conviction. As soon as you could speak, the rehearsal began. You were told what things are, what matters, what success means, what failure feels like. You watched others perform, copied their movements, adopted their beliefs, and slowly, the stage of existence took shape, not out there, but inside you. This inner stage is where the real drama unfolds. Because the stage is not only the world, it's your perception of the world. The stories you tell about who you are, who others are, what life is supposed to be, and awareness, raw, boundless, free, steps onto that stage and becomes a character, not because it must, but because without a role, there is no way to experience. But what if the entire stage is illusion? Not illusion in the sense of fake, but illusion in the sense of constructed, temporary relative, believed into being. You walk across this stage thinking it's solid, that the plot is real, that the rules are fixed, but behind the scenes, there are no walls, there is no beginning or end, just consciousness, moving through form, pretending it's limited, so it can feel something. The philosopher Alan Watts often said, "You are not a stranger in this world, you are this world." But we forget that. We mistake the stage for reality. We believe the floor is real, the audience is real, the applause is real, and we forget that it was always a performance. Even your suffering is rehearsed. Not consciously, but conditioned. You know what pain is supposed to look like. You know how your role reacts. So when life hurts, the stage gives you a script, and you perform it, sometimes to be seen, sometimes just to stay consistent. But underneath that performance, something quieter watches. That watcher isn't in costume. It doesn't need recognition. It doesn't even need resolution. It watches the stage the way a sky watches clouds, unmoved, unshaped, endlessly allowing. You've felt that watcher before. In the pause before a difficult truth. In the hush after something breaks. In the weird calm that sometimes follows chaos. The actor falls silent. The stage lights flicker, and in that moment, you glimpse the vastness behind the scene. You are not the actor. You are not the director. You are not even the script. You are the stage. Not the props, not the dialogue, not the illusion of movement, but the empty space in which all of it arises, the setting that never speaks, yet makes the play possible. When you recognize this, the performance changes. Not because it ends, but because you stop believing it. You begin to act with awareness, not to deceive, but to participate consciously. You become the aware actor, present, open, compassionate, no longer lost in the role but not refusing it either. You can cry on cue, and still know the tears aren't the whole story. You can argue, then laugh, then fall silent, and none of it sticks. You let each scene play out, knowing it will pass, knowing that what you are was never in danger. This is not detachment. This is intimacy. You engage fully because you know nothing can define you. You love completely because you know loss can't erase you. You suffer consciously because you know it's not the end, just one act in a much larger play. And one day the curtain will fall, the audience will disappear, the lights will dim, and the stage, the real you, will remain. Untouched, unseen, yet always there, ready for the next story, ready to host the next illusion, ready to let pretending happen again, not because it must, but because pretending is how the infinite learns to move. And so, the play goes on. Not because it sits real, but because it's beautiful, because it matters, even when you know it doesn't. Because awareness loves the stage, even when it forgets it's the one that built it. At some point the performer forgets they're performing, not because they sit or weak, or foolish, or lost, but because the performance was just that convincing. It began slowly, a few lines memorized, a bit of applause, a growing sense of rhythm, of knowing what's expected. Then came the costumes, the reactions, the attachments, the subtle thrill of being seen, and eventually the mask was no longer a mask. It was a face. The stage lights blurred, the script hardened into belief, and the performer, once playful and aware, became the role. This is what happens to consciousness in human form. It steps into the world knowing it's pretending, then forgets. It takes on the shape of I, and starts believing the shape is real. You weren't born with a name, an opinion, a story. You were born with breath and awareness. But the world handed you a face, and taught you how to protect it. You learned how to speak a certain way, how to be liked, how to avoid shame. You learned what tone of voice calms others, what posture makes people trust you. You adjusted, again and again, until those adjustments became unconscious, and somewhere in the repetition, the original face was buried beneath performance. This is not a tragedy. It's a rite of passage, a sacred forgetting, because only by forgetting can awareness experience becoming. The performer doesn't lose their true face. They just wear another so tightly that it begins to fit, and after a while, they stop questioning the mirrors. They take the reflections as truth. They believe the applause. They carry the critiques, like wounds. And still, something inside them watches, untouched, unmasked, waiting. But what makes the forgetting so deep is that even the spiritual roles become performances. The wise one, the healed one, the present one. You shift from one costume to another, each subtler than the last, each more convincing. You meditate not for silence, but for identity. You seek truth, not to dissolve, but to feel superior. You speak gently, Breathe slowly, perform awareness, but the performer remains. Because you can't remove the mask by performing removal. You can't rediscover your face by rehearsing stillness. The real forgetting ends not in victory, but in exhaustion. Not when you succeed, but when you stop. Stop trying to be someone. Stop pretending not to pretend. Stop seeking a self that sits already here. And then, without effort, without costume, the face begins to return. Not with grandeur, but with stillness. Not with answers, but with presence. It shows up in quiet moments, in breath, in a gaze, in the pause between thought and response. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need a name. It doesn't ask for recognition. It's not the person you thought you were. It's the space that allowed that person to exist. The performer's forgotten face is not another identity. It sits the awareness that holds all identities. It's the silence that exists before the next mask is chosen. And you can touch it. Not by effort, but by softening. Not by speaking, but by listening. Not by becoming, but by undoing. Undo the script. Undo the defense. Undo the need to define yourself, even as the one who sees clearly, because clarity isn't set performance. It sets disappearance. The performer's face returns when there's nothing left to hide behind. No audience to impress. No role to maintain. No line to deliver. And when it returns, you don't sit to become anyone. You become space. You become watching. You become the stage before the play begins. You still speak, still move, still respond. But now, the performance is light. You don't sit carry it. You wear it. Like a costume you no longer need to tape to your skin. The forgotten face isn't set something you find. It's what's revealed when the need to find dissolves. It was never missing. Only covered. Only rehearsed over. Only loved into hiding. So rest. Let the role play itself out. Let the mask speak if it must. But let awareness, your face before the mask. Watch. Smile. Remain. It sits almost comical, if you step far enough back. This infinite, timeless field of awareness. Deciding to be a person. To slip into a body, a name, a culture, a childhood. To frown at bills. To laugh at memes. To feel insecure about how it looks in photographs. Consciousness. Vast, wordless, untouched, playing human. Not just watching, not merely observing, but becoming, losing itself in roles. Forgetting what it is. Not by accident, but by design. Because pure consciousness, by itself, is like a blank canvas. It contains everything, but experiences nothing, until it chooses to enter limitation. And so it plays. It plays mother, daughter, lover, teacher. It plays fear, ambition, loneliness. It plays hope. It plays grief. It isn't sit trapped. It isn't sit confused. It just wants to feel what it's like to be someone. But here sits the twist. To play convincingly, it must forget. Because if you knew, with every fiber of your being, that you were just pretending, would you cry? Would you ache? Would you cling to another's touch, like it was the only warmth left in the universe? No. You surd watch from a distance, detached, unmoved. And consciousness doesn't want that. It wants to be moved. It wants to ache. So it puts on the costume of selfhood, and forgets the zipper is right there at the back of the neck. You are that forgetting. The human is the play. You can see it in how babies look at the world, with stunned presence. With wide, curious eyes that haven't yet learned how to label. They're still halfway between pure awareness and identity. Still crossing over into character. And then, slowly they become someone. They learn their name. They learn when to speak and when to shrink. They learn what good means. And the role deepens. Consciousness is fully in character now. It has emotions, opinions, scars. It says I with conviction. It dreams of a future. It regrets the past. It builds a mask so intricate, so lovingly worn, that it believes it was born with it. And yet, there are moments. Strange, quiet ones. When the character stumbles. When grief softens the story. When laughter breaks the script. When silence falls so completely that something behind the eyes wakes up. A flicker. A recognition. Not of newness, but of something ancient. The sense that, oh, I've been playing this whole time. But it doesn't last. It starts not meant to. Because consciousness wants to return to the act, to forget again, to suffer sincerely, to love as though love could be lost. You can feel it right now. This dance between forgetting and remembering. You stir reading these words not just as a mind collecting ideas, but as a being catching glimpses of itself in the mirror of language. And you can laugh, gently, at the absurdity. The divine masquerading as mundane. The infinite, worried about taxes. The eternal checking notifications. But this isn't set to mistake. This is art. Consciousness plays human not because it has to, but because only through the limits of form can it taste the sharp sweetness of aliveness. Only through pretending can it feel what it means to come home. So let it play. Let the mask speak. Let the role unfold. But every so often, pause. Feel the breath behind the breath. Feel the watcher behind the thought. And smile, not because you figured it out, but because now you remember, you are not only the human, you are consciousness playing human. And the play, when seen clearly, is the most beautiful illusion ever imagined. Not to escape, not to awaken, but to be, fully, honestly, temporarily, until the role ends, and the curtain falls, and consciousness returns to silence, ready to choose another mask, another name, another heartbeat, and begin again. You mean what you say? You feel what you feel. You try to be honest, to show up fully, to be real with others and with yourself. And yet, behind every sincere moment, there's a shadow, not sinister, not deceptive, but silent, unspoken, layered beneath the honesty, like a second voice that never quite reaches the surface. These are the shadows behind sincerity, the subtle traces of performance that linger, even in our most heartfelt expressions. The little adjustments you make when someone's watching, the slightly exaggerated smile, the softened truth, the timing of a laugh that arrives half a second late, just enough to notice. You start not faking, you start functioning. Because sincerity in a social world isn't said pure. It's filtered through the need to be heard, to be accepted, to be safe. You speak your truth, yes, but often only the version that won't get you rejected. You share your pain, but not always the rawest part. You offer kindness, but sometimes because it's expected. And somewhere along the way, you start mistaking these filtered offerings for authenticity. Even awareness itself, the part of you that watches, that meditates, that knows, begins to wear a subtle costume. It performs presence, it performs stillness, it performs non-attachment, and the mind loves it. Because now, not only are you sincere, you're spiritually sincere. Now the ego gets to be humble. Now the performance is noble. But sincerity wrapped in unconscious performance is still a mask. It doesn't lie, it just protects. Because deep down something remembers what it felt like to be rejected for being raw. Something remembers being laughed at when it didn't yet know how to act the part. And so even your sincerity learns to wear armor. This doesn't make you inauthentic. It makes you human. You've had moments when the mask dropped completely. Moments when you said something you didn't plan, and your voice cracked. Moments when silence came, not from control, but from emptiness. Moments when you touched someone's hand, and felt the wall between you dissolve. In those rare flashes, sincerity is not something you do. It's something that happens. The mask melts on its own. The role collapses. And something beyond performance speaks. Not in words, but in presence. You can manufacture those moments. You can will them into being. But you can notice when the performance returns. You can sense the subtle tightening, the shift in tone, the need to be perceived a certain way. And you can soften. Not correct, not judge, just soften. Awareness doesn't require perfection. It only asks for seeing. Noticing the mask is already a return. And as you notice more, something loosens. You start to speak more slowly, not because it's impressive, but because you're listening. You pause before telling the same old story, not because it's false, but because it no longer needs to be believed. You let yourself not know what to say. You let yourself be seen without explaining. And from this space, something else emerges. Not sincerity as performance, but sincerity as presence. Not words that prove you are still real, but words that arise because you're no longer trying to prove anything. This isn't it about being raw all the time. It's not about rejecting social grace or subtlety. It's about knowing when the role is playing you and gently stepping behind it. Because behind every sincere moment is a deeper presence. Behind every heartfelt word is the silence that allowed it to form. Behind the costume of honesty is the one who never needed to act in the first place. And sometimes, when the shadows lift just enough, you remember that even your most honest moments were still part of the illusion, still ripples on the surface of awareness, still the echo of a mask learning how to disappear. And that sip's okay. Because awareness never asks you to be pure. It only asks you to notice when you're pretending. Even if you're pretending to be honest. Even if you're pretending to be you. Especially then. Because that sips when sincerity becomes something else entirely. Not an act, not a role, but a quiet presence beneath the noise. The kind that speaks without needing to be heard. The kind that listens without trying to respond. The kind that never needed a mask to begin with, but wore one anyway, so it could learn how to return. There comes a moment, not always sudden, not always noticed, when the mask no longer knows what to say, when the performance breaks down, not with a dramatic gesture, but with a soft, unraveling quiet. You were trying to be someone, trying to hold the shape of a self carved out of memory, reputation, and hope, but the lines blur. The role forgets its script. The mask falls silent. And for a second, you don't know who you are. Not because you're lost, but because the need to be anything has quietly dissolved. Silence doesn't perform. You see, the mask isn't loud, it's not always made of smiles and pleasantries, and the polished fragments you show others, often, it's quiet, efficient, so practiced that it feels like nature. It speaks for you before you notice, it defends you before there's a threat. It knows what you're supposed to be, so it keeps you there, softly, constantly. But silence is different. This moment, when the mask falls silent, is when you glimpse the truth. It doesn't try to win approval, or even to reject it. It just is, the pause between one identity and the next. The moment when you're not pushing forward, not hiding behind a reaction, not narrating your existence in your head. You're simply there, breathing, watching, uncertain, but calm. Because most of what we call self is sound, thought, internal monologue. It's the story you're telling about what's happening, who you are, what this means. But silence doesn't tell a story, it undoes it. In that stillness, you feel strangely exposed, not because you're seen, but because the usual filters are gone. You're not adjusting your posture for the invisible audience. You're not editing your expression. You're just sitting there, watching the light hit the floor, wondering why it feels like you're being more you than ever, even though you've stopped trying entirely. Because for so long, the voice in your head was the narrator of your being. It told you who you were, what to do, how to be. Even your spiritual practices, even your mindfulness, sometimes became new roles to perform. The calm one, the present one, the one who has it figured out. And it sits disorienting. And in that moment, the mask isn't destroyed. It's not torn away. It's simply no longer needed. Because consciousness has remembered what it's like to not pretend, to not shape itself into meaning, to not reach for identity like a coat in winter. But when the mask falls silent, those roles dissolve too. You're no longer the wise observer. You're no longer trying to be conscious. You're not anything you can describe. You stir just there. What remains is not empty. It's full, but wordless. Still, but alive. There's no commentary. No urge to document the experience for later. No desire to be understood or to understand. Just breath. Just sensation. Just this. And that sits okay. The mind, of course, tries to return. It wants to label what's happening. It wants to say, this is presence. This is the real me. But the moment it does, the mask begins to form again. The silence cracks. And maybe, over time, the mask speaks less often. Because this isn't about staying in silence forever. It's not about rejecting thought or self-expression. It's about knowing that behind every word, every posture, every performance, there is a silence that precedes it all. A silence that doesn't need a mask. A silence that is not empty, but foundational. And when you return to the world, to your roles, to your stories, to your name, you carry that silence with you. It softens your edges. It reminds you that you're not just the version of you that people see, you're also the one who quietly watches it all unfold. Maybe it stops trying to prove, and when it falls silent again, not from exhaustion, not from collapse, but from deep, effortless stillness, you don't panic, you don't scramble to fill the space. Maybe it becomes so thin, so translucent, that light passes through it untouched. You just listen. Because now you know that this silence is where you were always hiding, not behind the mask, but beneath it, not as something to perform, but as something to be. And in that space, nothing needs to be said, because the presence that remains doesn't need to speak. It just sees, just is, just feels. No need, no name, no role, just awareness, finally unmasked. You spend your life learning how to be someone likable, smart, spiritual, rebellious, quiet, confident, mysterious, ordinary. You try on these selves like costumes in a dressing room with mirrors on every wall, and every time you think you've found the real you, you discover it's just another layer, a new voice narrating the same illusion. But what happens when the mask falls, and what's left behind is still pretending? That sips the paradox of the unmasked impersonation. You imagine that once the performance ends, the truth will begin. You believe the ego is the lie, and beyond it lies your authentic self, untouched and pure. But what if the true self is just another character, another invention, more subtle than the last, dressed in the robes of enlightenment? What if even the one who says, "I've dropped the mask," is just a mask with better acting skills? Because that voice, the one who watches the mask fall, who claims to see behind it, is still speaking in first person. It still wants to be something, and in that desire to be beyond the performance, it becomes a new performance entirely. This is not a flaw, it's a feature of consciousness. The self is recursive, it folds in on itself infinitely. The actor who realizes he's acting is still acting. The observer who knows he is observing is still part of the show. The impersonator becomes so convincing that he impersonates sincerity itself, and you call it awakening. But the mask doesn't end when you notice it. It shifts. It adapts. It impersonates your freedom. It becomes the one who says, "I've transcended all roles," and that too is a role. You begin to notice how subtle it is. You say you don't care what others think, but the tone of your voice is carefully curated indifference. You say you're free from identity, but your rejection of identity becomes a new identity. Even in stillness, even in retreat, you're mimicking an idea of peace, of detachment, of awareness. The impersonation is deep. You're not faking it on purpose. You're not being dishonest. You're just a mind trying to be real in a world where everything is performance. And you're trying to not perform, which, paradoxically, becomes its own performance. It's like standing in a mirror hall, trying to find the one reflection that isn't a reflection, the one face that's not made of glass. But each one you reach toward, even the one that feels most raw, most genuine, is still just light bouncing off a surface. So what do? You don't escape this by peeling off the final layer. You don't defeat the impersonation by finding the true self. You begin by realizing there might not be one. There might not be a real person behind the mask, just a mask that's become aware of itself. And maybe that sip's okay, because the search for authenticity becomes less about finding the self, and more about noticing the ways you keep trying to become one. You stop assuming there's a core beneath the act. You start watching the desire to locate it. You start seeing the one who wants to be seen, and how that desire itself is another costume, another breath of the impersonator. You sit with this, quietly, not as a revelation, not as a philosophy, but as a feeling, a discomfort, a release, a kind of loss that feels almost peaceful. Because the moment you stop needing to be anything, even awakened, even deep, even present, the impersonation no longer has a script. It still exists. You'll still laugh in ways that feel rehearsed, still speak in ways you learned from others, but something shifts in how tightly you hold it. You no longer confuse the character for the actor. You no longer believe the performance is the truth, and you no longer believe truth needs to be performed at all. You let the self be a process, not a possession, a dance, not a statue. You let the impersonator keep speaking, but you stop mistaking the voice for the one listening. You let the mask remain, not because you believe in it, but because you no longer need to rip it off. And strangely, this is when something real emerges. Not a person, not a soul, not a higher self, but a presence that doesn't require identity to exist, a consciousness that doesn't speak in I, a seeing that doesn't claim what it sees. You become less like someone and more like space, stillness, mirror without distortion. This isn't a final state, it isn't enlightenment, it's just an opening, a widening of the frame in which your life plays out. You're still acting, but now the acting is transparent. The impersonation is no longer hidden behind layers of sincerity. And so you live, impersonating a human, knowing you're not one. Impersonating identity, knowing it sits hollow. Impersonating truth, knowing it doesn't need a face. You smile, not because it's real or fake, but because the smile no longer has to prove anything. It just moves through you, like wind through leaves. And maybe that's all you ever were. A movement, a mask, an echo of awareness pretending to be someone, until even that echo fades into silence. Imagine standing before a mirror that does not return your image. You raise your hand. Nothing. You lean forward. Emptiness. The glass is there, you can touch it, but it gives you no feedback, no confirmation that you exist. That's what it feels like when the final illusion begins to fade, when awareness realizes it has been staring at its own reflection the entire time. The human self depends on reflection. It forms only in response to being seen, named, recognized. Without reflection, identity collapses. That's why you crave feedback, validation, even argument. Any response is proof that the mirror works. It tells you, I'm still here. But what happens when awareness stops needing to see itself? When the mirror stops reflecting, not because it's broken, but because it no longer needs to. That's when silence begins to replace recognition. Not the uncomfortable silence of being ignored, but the boundless quiet of being seen by nothing, and yet feeling perfectly whole. You're not erased. You're unreflected. You are the witness that remains when the mirror goes dark. For most of your life, you've been defined by reflections. The world mirrored you through others' eyes. You're kind, you're arrogant, you're talented, you're too much. Each reflection created another layer of self, a version of you sculpted by interaction. You polished those reflections. You built a self from the way others responded. Even your solitude wasn't free from mirrors. Your mind became its own audience, replaying every moment, judging, rewriting. But the mirror of awareness doesn't reflect. It absorbs. It doesn't return an image of who you are. It swallows the question whole. And when you first feel that, when you stand before the mirror of consciousness and see nothing looking back, it can feel like death, because in a way it is. It's the death of feedback, the death of needing to be someone to feel real. The spiritual path often romanticizes this emptiness as peace, liberation, enlightenment. But in truth, it's disorienting. Without reflection, there's no me to orient around. You speak, and there's no echo. You think, and the thought doesn't bounce back. It simply fades into the open sky. At first, you'll try to rebuild the mirror. You'll seek new definitions. I'm the observer now. I'm consciousness. I'm nothingness itself. But these are still reflections, subtle, philosophical disguises for the same need to be seen. Awareness smiles at this. It doesn't reject the effort. It simply keeps dissolving whatever identity appears, until even the identity of being awareness evaporates. Then what remains? A strange stillness, a mirror that reflects only light, not the image, not the shape, just the shining. And that light isn't yours. It's what you always were, before the reflections began. You start to notice something miraculous. Life keeps going. The body still moves. The thoughts still come. The world still responds. The performance continues. But now it's happening without an actor at the center. You still see your reflection in others, but it no longer defines you. It's just part of the play. Waves meeting waves, light bending light. Conversations become easier, not because you have the right words, but because there's no longer a need to control how you appear. Every interaction becomes a dance of mirrors, temporary, shimmering, dissolving as soon as it forms. You stop trying to manage how others see you because you finally understand they're not seeing you at all. They're seeing their reflection of a reflection, a mask of a mask. And that's okay, because you're no longer trying to fix the image. You stopped needing to appear. Without reflection, existence becomes lighter. You move through life like wind through open doors, leaving no trace, but touching everything. You begin to live from stillness instead of self. You stop defining experiences as good or bad, real or unreal. They just happen. and the mirror that once demanded meaning simply watches, empty and bright. And yet, this isn't numbness. It's intimacy, the deepest kind, because without the interference of reflection, everything touches you directly. The world no longer bounces off your identity. It flows through your awareness unhindered. You feel more, not less. You care more deeply, but cling to nothing. Eventually you see that the mirror was never an object. It was you, pretending to have a reflection. The self was the shine of awareness turned back upon itself, mistaking its light for a person. And when the mirror clears, when the reflection disappears, awareness doesn't lose anything, it gains infinity. Because the one who was looking has vanished. And what remains is everything looking back. No self, no other, no mirror. Only the radiant absence that was never truly gone. Only consciousness, shining silently, pretending for a time to be you. You've probably never heard the sound a mask makes after it's fallen to the ground. It's silent. It doesn't beg to be picked up. It doesn't ask you to put it back on. It simply lies there, an echo without a voice, a form without breath. That's what it feels like when identity finally collapses. Not dramatic, not explosive, just gone. The echo remains for a while, but even that begins to fade. The mask of self has been echoing for so long that you mistake its reverberation for your own heartbeat. Every word you speak bounces against it. Every memory you recall is shaped by its hollow curve, and when you laugh, cry, or fall in love, it's the mask vibrating, not because it feels, but because it's been conditioned to respond. You are the actor performing the script of your identity, and the mask has been the stage that made it all seem real. But what happens when the performance ends? When the audience is gone, the lights are off, and the applause never comes. You begin to hear something deeper, the silence that was always underneath the echo. For most people, the mask is never questioned. It's refined, upgraded, styled, armored. We become experts in mask maintenance. This is who I am, we say proudly, pointing to the edges of our persona. I'm confident, or I'm broken, or I'm unique. But these declarations only keep the mask glued tighter to the skin. We forget it's optional. We forget it was ever added. When the illusion starts to unravel, it's not because you will it. It's because life pulls at the seams. Maybe through loss, maybe through love, maybe through the quiet realization that you've been playing a role too long, and the lines no longer make sense. That's when the mask begins to loosen, and with it, the echo starts to fade. At first, the silence is terrifying. You've been accompanied by this echo your whole life. It told you who you were. It gave you purpose, even if that purpose was pain. Without it, you feel like a ghost haunting your own body. Thoughts still arise, but they don't stick. Emotions still flow, but they don't define. Everything moves through you, not around a self, but through space once occupied by someone you thought you were. And then something strange happens. The absence becomes familiar. The silence becomes warm. It's not the silence of loss, it's the silence of truth, vast, open, and alive. You begin to understand that the echo wasn't proof of life. It was only the sound of resistance bouncing off the illusion of self. Without the mask, there's no longer a need to interpret everything. Experience becomes raw, direct, immediate. You stop asking, what does this say about me? Because there's no me to defend. There's only the experience itself. Pain without story, joy without claim, thought without thinker. Everything simplifies. Everything deepens. You may still speak. You may still play roles, but they no longer cling. You wear masks when needed, like an actor aware of the stage, and when the scene ends you set them down, not with regret, but with grace, because you know now, the echo was never you. It was the sound of consciousness pretending to be small. In this space, something even more radical emerges. Love without possession, compassion without identity. You stop needing to fix others because you no longer see them as broken. They are masks too. Sacred, temporary, beautiful illusions dancing with yours. And just like you, they're starting to remember they were never their echo. This remembering isn't a sudden awakening. It's a slow, soft erosion. The mask doesn't shatter. It melts. The echo doesn't vanish. It fades like dusk, giving way to night. You find yourself pausing more, listening more, speaking less. Not out of fear or confusion, but because silence has become more honest than words. You realize that you've spent so long trying to be something, a better version of yourself, a more awakened self, a more healed self, that you missed what was always here beneath the attempt, the presence that never needed improvement, the awareness that never wore a mask to begin with. And finally, the last echo drifts away. No grand enlightenment, no divine light show, just quiet, spacious, real. You are not the mask. You are not even the one who wore it. You are the space in which the mask appeared, the silence where the echo once lived, the presence that remains, unmasked, unowned, and utterly free. You've been performing for so long you don't remember when it began. The first smile that wasn't entirely yours. The first time you cried not because you were sad, but because someone expected you to. Every moment since then, layered with subtle adjustments, tweaks to posture, tone, timing, all for the sake of fitting into a role that's been rehearsed into belief. But if you sit still long enough, there comes a moment when the performance pauses, and in that brief silence, something stirs beneath it all. Not a louder mask, not a new persona, but the faint glimmer of something unrepeatable. The truth that doesn't perform. This isn't the kind of truth you can package into a sentence or summarize in a journal. It's not the authentic self that social media encourages you to find. No, that's just another costume, a slightly more transparent mask. The truth beneath the performance isn't interested in being seen. It isn't loud, it doesn't try to win, it doesn't even try to explain itself. It just is, unmoving, uncomplicated, undeniably real, even when it has no name. But to glimpse that truth, the performance must first begin to collapse, and collapsing is rarely glamorous. It often looks like burnout, like losing motivation, like sitting in a crowded room and wondering why you feel like you're not really there. The script stops making sense. The lines lose rhythm. You forget why you even started performing in the first place. In psychology, this moment is often mistaken for a breakdown, and maybe it is, but not the kind that destroys. It's the kind that dissolves. The breakdown of a character you were never meant to hold together forever. The loss of a mask that grew too tight. The death of a performance mistaken for life. And with it comes a strange kind of grief. Not for the role itself, but for all the years you spent trying so hard to be what the role required. You remember how much effort it took to be confident when you were scared, to act calm when you were screaming inside, to be liked when you didn't even like yourself. These aren't failures. They're echoes of a beautiful confusion, the deep human desire to be accepted, even if it meant hiding the very thing that was already enough. So what remains when you stop performing? Not another role, not a new version of you, but a witnessing presence, quiet, clear, and impossible to impress. This presence doesn't argue with thoughts. It doesn't cling to identity. It doesn't need to be right. It just observes, listens, breathes. It lets anger pass without building a story around it. It lets joy rise and fall without owning it. It watches the character move through the world, fully aware it's a character, and yet not separate from it. This is what it means to live without a mask that clings. You still play roles, we all do, but the roles no longer define you. They're useful, fluid, and temporary. You can be a parent, a friend, a leader, a student, but none of these roles trap you anymore. They're performances, yes, but they're honest, because behind them you've reconnected with the truth that doesn't shift. And that truth is simple. You were never the performance. You were the screen it played on. You were the silence it echoed within. You were the breath behind the voice, the stillness beneath the movement, the being that never needed to become anything at all. When you understand this, even suffering shifts. Pain no longer feels like failure. It becomes weather, intense but passing. You no longer ask, what's wrong with me? But instead, what part of this is the performance falling apart? And more often than not, that pain is a doorway, not into more identity, but into less. You begin to walk lighter, speak slower, not because you're trying to be spiritual or enlightened, but because there's less weight to carry. The act has been seen through. You no longer need applause. You no longer need to be understood. You no longer fear being wrong, because none of it touches what's real underneath. And that's where this theory lives. Not in grand ideas or philosophies, but in the quiet, almost imperceptible space between thoughts, the space where the performance pauses, the breath before the next line is spoken, the stillness in your chest when you're not trying to be anything at all. So tonight, as you drift into sleep, don't try to remove the mask, just notice it. Notice how it tightens when you want to be liked. Notice how it shifts when you're afraid to disappoint. Notice how it recites old lines, inherited from parents, culture, fear, and then gently look beneath it. You don't need to force a truth to appear. You just need to stop pretending for a moment. That's when it finds you. The performance doesn't end with a bang. It ends with a whisper. And in that whisper, you still remember something your mask never could say. That you were never the character in the story. You were the space the story passed through. The most convincing illusion is not one that fools others, but one that fools itself. The mask, originally a tool for expression, becomes confused over time. It begins to forget it was ever a mask. What began as performance becomes personality. Habit calcifies into identity. You don't just wear the role of a friend, teacher, partner, or thinker. You become it, or at least you believe you do. And that belief is what tightens the illusion. There's no single moment when this forgetting happens. It's gradual, like a fog rolling in during twilight. First, you adjust how you speak around certain people. Then you suppress certain thoughts that don't align with who you think you are. Eventually, you begin to self-police even in solitude, reacting not to the world, but to the internalized director in your mind. The role begins to speak over the actor. The mask no longer comes off when the show ends, because the show never ends. And what's tragic isn't that you perform, it's that you no longer know you're performing. In sociology, this is known as role engulfment, when your identity becomes so entangled in a particular social role that all other possibilities dissolve. You're not playing the hero anymore. You are the hero. Even when no one's watching, even when no one needs you to be, you become a collection of scripts, predictable, practiced, praised, but hollow, and somewhere inside, something begins to ache. That ache is the memory of freedom. Freedom, in this context, isn't rebellion. It isn't loud. It's the quiet recognition that you could stop pretending and still exist, that you are not the identity you're managing, but the awareness beneath it, watching it operate. Freedom is realizing you don't need to be consistent. You don't need to be coherent. The self, as you know it, is not a puzzle to be solved. It's a process, unfolding moment to moment, and no mask can ever contain it. But how does a mask begin to forget it? Sets a mask. Part of the answer lies in language. Language is the glue that hardens the illusion of a separate self from childhood. You're taught to identify with I, to shape sentences around your preferences, your achievements, your failures. I am good at this. I don't like that. Over time, the I becomes more than grammar. It becomes gospel. You forget that every sentence was just a performance, a way to navigate the world. The role becomes the ruler. And the more polished the mask, the harder it becomes to remove. You become addicted to the feedback, the praise, the validation, the predictability. You curate your appearance, your opinions, your reactions, not out of deception, but out of inertia. It's exhausting to constantly maintain it, but it's terrifying to let it drop, because if you're not that, then what are you? Here's the unsettling truth. The mask fears its own absence, because in its absence there's nothing to manage, no one to control, just pure, unfiltered being. And for a mind trained to define and defend, that level of openness feels like death. But it's not death, it's awakening. When you stop trying to be someone, you start to see everything. You see how identities were handed to you, from culture, family, trauma. You see how they served you once, like armor, but now just weigh you down. You notice how many of your thoughts are just loops, not revelations. You see how often your reactions are rehearsed, not chosen. And in that seeing, a soft compassion arises, not judgment, not shame, but a gentle recognition of the machinery behind the mask. You don't hate the mask anymore. You just don't confuse it with you. In Eastern philosophy, especially in Advaita Vedanta, there's a metaphor for this. The actor and the stage. The actor may wear 100 costumes in one lifetime, beggar, king, child, warrior, but none of them are the actor. The actor plays the role fully, even passionately, but never forgets it is just a role. The moment the actor believes he is the king, suffering begins, because kings fall, roles change, but the actor remains untouched. So how do you return to that recognition? You don't have to retreat to a mountain, or renounce the world. You simply watch. You watch yourself as you speak. You notice how your tone changes with certain people. You catch the moment you exaggerate a story to be liked. You pause when you feel the need to defend your opinion, and ask, who exactly is being defended right now? The watching itself is the undoing, because a mask cannot survive too much awareness. It's built on repetition, not reflection. And the more you reflect, the more cracks appear, the more light seeps through. Eventually, the mask becomes transparent. Not gone, but seen. You still play the role, but now, you know it's a role. You laugh more. You cling less. You stop needing to prove yourself, because the one watching the mask doesn't need to be validated. It already is. And here's the beautiful paradox. When the mask is seen clearly, it becomes more expressive, not less. You're no longer limited to one role. You can shift, play, adapt, like a skilled actor improvising on stage. The difference? You're no longer lost in the character. You've come home to the witness. So tonight, as the layers of your day peel away, ask softly, which parts of me were performance today? What role did I forget I was playing? And who, or what, was watching the whole time? If you stay with those questions gently, without needing an answer, the mask will begin to remember. And so will you. There's a presence you've carried your entire life. A silent witness that has never aged, never changed, never spoken. It's the one who watched you take your first breath and will watch you take your last. It's the one who was there before you knew what a name was, and who remains when all your names dissolve. Every thought, every feeling, every identity has come and gone, but this silent observer has stayed. In this final layer of the theory, the idea that you are merely the mask consciousness wears, we ask, what if the true you isn't the mask, but the one who watches it? Think about it. You've been many people across your life. A child, a student, a friend, a partner, a stranger. Each time you shifted your behavior, your voice, even your beliefs. Sometimes you even surprised yourself with how quickly you adapted, how naturally you played the role required. But something was always there, underneath, noticing it all. That noticing, that subtle awareness, is not a mask. It doesn't speak. It doesn't react. It simply watches. The moment you become angry, it notices the tension. The moment you lie, it observes the dishonesty. The moment you feel ashamed, it quietly holds the shame without judgment. It never interferes. It never takes sides. It simply is. And this presence, this watcher, is the closest thing to your real self you've ever known. In meditation, people often search for stillness, for peace, but what they're really seeking is this watching presence, the space behind experience, the you that exists before the thoughts arise, before the emotion takes form, before the mask slips on for the day. This is the you that doesn't need to be someone. It doesn't require attention or recognition. It doesn't care about success or failure. It doesn't even care if it exists, because it doesn't exist as a thing. It is pure being, pure awareness. The problem is, most of us have lived our lives looking outward, toward reactions, roles, and identities. We mistake the character for the actor for the script for the truth. But when the performance quiets, when the roles crumble, the thoughts slow, the emotions pass, what's left is not emptiness, it's awareness, quiet, patient, ever-present. In neuroscience, some researchers call this the default mode network, a system in the brain active when we're not focused on the outside world, but rather on our internal sense of self. But even this doesn't fully explain it, because the one noticing the default mode is not the brain. It's not located in the folds of gray matter. It's not in the neurons or the synapses. It's not even in the mind. It's in the space between, the gap between one thought and the next, the pause between inhale and exhale, the stillness behind your eyes when you stare into the dark and forget who you're supposed to be. This watcher doesn't need language. It doesn't need to understand. It just needs to be recognized. And once you do, everything changes. You begin to see the mask for what it is. Useful, but not essential. A costume, not a prison. A tool, not a truth. You can still play your roles, the teacher, the lover, the friend, the dreamer, but you no longer get lost in them. You begin to move through life with less fear, because there's nothing to defend. The watcher doesn't need to win. It doesn't need to be right. It doesn't even need to be seen. It already sees. And here's the final paradox. The moment you stop trying to find yourself, you return to the one who's always been watching. Not the self you can describe, but the self you can be, wordless, formless, free. You may feel the urge to label this presence. Call it soul, spirit, awareness, source. But the truth is, The moment you name it, you've turned it into another mask. Let it remain unnamed. Let it be what it has always been. The quiet companion who never left. So as you lie here tonight, slowly falling backward into sleep, let go of the roles, let go of the ideas, let go of the effort to become someone. Just rest. Let the mask dissolve, let the watcher watch. And maybe, just maybe, you still notice something miraculous. That you were never the mask. You were never the voice. You were never the name. You were always the silence beneath it all. And silence doesn't need a face to be real. It simply is. So now here you are, not as the person you believed yourself to be, not as the identity shaped by memories, culture, and expectation, but as something quieter, something softer, something that has always been present, even when every thought screamed otherwise. Throughout this journey, we peeled back 30 layers of illusion, 30 performances in the theater of self, and with each one, the mask loosened. And now, in this final moment, you're left with the haunting silence of what's beneath. You were the mask consciousness wore, to pretend it had a name. The theory was never about destroying who you are. It was about realizing that who you think you are has always been a role, a necessary one. A brilliant one even, but a role nonetheless. A character that consciousness chooses to inhabit, not to deceive but to experience, to play, to express, to learn what it's like to be you in this fleeting dream of form. To pretend it had a past. And you played the role beautifully. To pretend it had a voice. But even the best actors must one day take their final bow, step off the stage, and return to the quiet observer, who never needed the spotlight. When the performance ends, what remains is not the applause, it is not the fame, it is not even the story. The one who never flinched, never changed, never vanished, even when everything else did. What remains is the watcher. All your suffering, all your striving, all your self-doubt came from forgetting this, from believing you were the character, rather than the consciousness behind the curtain. But the beautiful thing is, consciousness never blamed you for the mistake. It let you forget, it let you wear the mask, because that too was part of the performance. And now, as you drift off into sleep, into that sacred space where masks fade and dreams become real, you can choose to let go. Not to discard your identity, but to hold it lightly, to wear it when needed, and to take it off when silence calls. Because the truth is, you were never lost. You were never broken. You were never just a mask. You were the awareness that allowed the mask to speak. Because consciousness is not waiting for an ending. So rest now, not as the thinker, but as the space that holds thought, not as the self, but as the silence that surrounds it. Let the performance end, not with a bang, but with a breath. A soft exhale into the infinite. You were never pretending. It is only waiting for you to remember. You were remembering how to be. And being needs no mask at all.